Right, welcome everybody back to another stream of Fear the Old Lore, where we examine the Japanese text of Bloodborne and compare it to its English variety to see if there's any kind of significant differences between the two versions of the game, and to get a more informed look at the lore of the game. And yesterday we went ahead and finished off with the Forbidden Woods, defeating the Shadows of Yharnam, and then entering Byrgenwerth. Excuse me. And along the way to the Forbidden Woods, we did go ahead and fight Alfred to just show off that he doesn't use the Executioner wheel, and instead he uses the Kirk hammer. So pretty much everything through the Forbidden Woods is done for now. So now that we do have access to that badge, I'm going to go ahead and show off what it'll allow us to buy. And I should have done that on the last stream, but I failed to do so. So, with Alfred having been defeated, we don't get like the full-on Executioner set from his badge. Instead, we are just able to buy the Gold Ardeo. In order to get the full Executioner set, you do have to visit Cainhurst and purchase it from there. So, the Gold Ardeo is the odd helmet worn by the band of Executioners, commanded by the martyr Logarius. The conical gold helmet, symbol of Executioners, represents luminosity, ambition, and unflagging resolve to face impurity, staring it down with stern, golden spirit. As the great Logarius once said, acts of goodness are not always wise, and acts of evil are not always foolish, but regardless, we shall always strive to be good. There were a few differences in the Japanese, and well, this isn't necessarily a difference in the Japanese. It calls it the Ardeo as well. I just want to make like a bit of a note that I think it was Ardeo that comes from Latin. Let me just pull this up real quick. And it does mean something like is burning on like fire. Well, not literally, more like in a kind of zealous way. To be like flashing, glowing, sparkling. To be in a rage or in like a state of turmoil or love, like love sickness. So there is quite a bit of emotion associated with the word Ardeo, and it does come from Latin like I originally thought. So the last part of the second paragraph about staring, facing impurity and staring it down with stern golden spirit is pretty similar, but I just want to emphasize that it seems like the kind of impurity that they're talking about is probably most specifically related to the impurity found within the Vile Blood clan, or the Impure Blood clan, as I've mentioned before. And then his quote is a little bit different in Japanese, so I'll just go ahead and read my retranslation of it. It says, "There is no correlation between good and evil in wisdom and foolishness, and so we alone shall be simply good." And I do like that text, honestly. And one thing that I kind of think goes along with the quote in this context is it seems almost likely as though the Executioners followed Ludwig to some degree. I don't believe that Ludwig was the one who necessarily founded the Executioners, but his idea about creating Spartans for the Healing Church to serve as its holy blades, and the idea that if he kind of turns a blind eye to the kind of atrocities that he's committing because he believes like the actions of the Healing Churches are supposed to be good, and if he follows the Healing Church he'll be following down a righteous path. I think that could naturally lead into the group of like the Executioners coming up with this kind of motto and continuing on with those footsteps. And I think that's it for now, since we don't have the rest of the Executioner set, but we should be able to get the wheel, and I don't think there's any new firearms. So let's look at the Logarius wheel next. Rubito, welcome back to the stream, and we're looking at the Logarius wheel now and all of the Executioner related items that we got from Alfred's Wheel Hunter badge in the last stream. So this is a weapon wielded by Martyr Logarius' band of Executioners, used to slaughter the Vile Bloods in Cainhurst, bathed in pools of their blood, and forever steeped in their ire. Transformed to release the power of the wheel and manifest their lingering rage in a show of utter brilliance. This item fascinates me a lot because it shows that if certain possessions are rubbed in pools of blood, or if they're just allowed to soak blood for a period of time. Particularly if they're like done with the pools of blood that belong to victims or people who were like in anguish when they were killed. It seems as though those kind of lingering spirits can possess those items and be used. And so I do think this is thematically really relevant when we compare them to like the Executioner's Gloves. No relation, which is a little bit confusing, and I'll talk about that more when we get to it. But there are at least 2 instances of just like something being soaked in blood and being able to have a kind of attachment to like metaphysical skulls and spirits of the dead, and that seems to be a property of the blood in general, in my opinion. And I'm not sure if there's anything different in the Japanese for this. Yeah, for the most part, it's pretty much the same. So that'll be it for this item. Hello, Sundry Saturn. It's nice to see you again, and I'm glad you guys are able to make it to the stream. And I did not go ahead and farm any more like vermin. So instead, we're just going to go back to Byrgenwerth and look at all the lore notes there. This time, I will go ahead and just fight Rom at this stage of the game, and maybe following that, I'll probably visit like the first floor of the lecture hall and leave it as it is, and then probably go back to Yahar'gul. Since the last lore through that we did, I did show off like all of the benefits of having like 60 points of insight before Rom gets revealed, to just show that there is that kind of a consistency in like the notes we're about to find, everything about crying babies. So these are the Gardens of Ice. Obviously, I think there's another one, or maybe I killed the one that was patrolling. I'll probably end up getting grabbed in the midst of trying to look at this. So trying to manipulate some of the great Bloodborne ragdoll physics. You can see that in this creature's left hand, it's got a kind of a stone of a spider on it, which is not very clear right now. I was ready for it and still got grabbed. Fortunately, with like low insight, it's not too dangerous of falling to the frenzy mechanic right there. Alright, so this is a really good angle of that kind of a stone that I was talking about. You can very clearly see like the legs of a spider in the shape of like its full body on there. On the like top side of it, arguably, there's a bunch of like eyes all around that orb. Unfortunately, like there's no real reason why they seem to have these orbs. In some of the cut content, I guess the Gardens of Eyes had extra attacks, and they used the spider orbs to initiate some kind of a magic attacks, and that would be the most likely reason that they're carrying them around. As far as like the final version of the game, like it's just one of those enigmatic things that we don't really have good answers for. So Ruby says, these guys remind you of how people transform due to worship in Dark Souls. Their heads are very similar to Rom's, and the stone in their hands could imply worship of some kind. No idea why they'd have wings, though. Rom has none. Right. And so some people do theorize whether or not Rom is like a kind of butterfly type thing, and whether or not Ebrietis is also a butterfly, because I suppose that's a name of a genus of butterflies to some degree. I personally think it's more related to inebriation, and like the Latin root for that. Alright, so here's going to be the grab attack of Mist. So now there will be the grab attack with its main weapon. poison can retract, and it does when you kill it. Oh, we got a Shaman Bodin Blade, which is a bit different. And we did not show that kind of attack off before, so it is kind of cool to see it now in Byrgenwerth when you do get more of those kind of mad slugs that Valter was talking about. And so, like, while you can encounter the one in Cathedral Ward, like, this is kind of the most like, accessible brain sucker, I suppose you could say. And there's also the one in Yosefka's clinic. Their placement is a bit of a mystery. I just personally think that they're probably experiments to some degree with, like, putting phantasms in people's heads to see if they would be able to, like, hold on to them or, like, probably transform into greater being. But we get another Arcane Lake Rude. I won't go ahead and read that just because it's similar to all the other ones. It just has a arcane defense, if you could believe it or not. So, Scully Baba, hello and welcome to the stream. You say, does the Threaded Cane have a higher base damage than the Axe? Oh no, definitely not. The Threaded Cane has, like, some of the worst base damages in the game, but it has really high scaling. With that being said, though, the Threaded Cane's, like, untransformed R2 does thrusting damage, which is really effective against kin-type enemies, it seems. So that's why I was able to kill that brain sucker relatively quickly if you kind of ignore me being brain sucked by it. Yeah, and so when you do transform it and use the whip form, it does serrated damage, which is a bit more effective against beasts. But if you like look at some of my earlier streams where I just kind of crash against the cleric beast, the Threaded Cane's base damage is indeed very low, but now I'm a bit more leveled up, so I can do pretty respectable damage at this point. Which background are you running on this, if you don't mind me asking? Are you asking, like, what platform? I'm on the PS4, and I don't have any, like, fancy stream setup either. It's just broadcasted from the PS4. Oh, the class? I honestly don't even remember. I guess it doesn't say your origin on here, does it? I think I might have chosen something like military, but I didn't do Waste of Skin just because for, like, a lore run, I didn't want to take the time to level. I know it does in, like, Dark Souls for sure. So, going back to what Rubito was saying, you said you always found the little burp they do after sucking your inside out to be comical. Yeah. I do like a lot of the animations that FromSoft puts in the game, and there's, like, kind of a lot of, like, storytelling, even some of the simple things like that. And so I did put it out yesterday, but I may as well do it now. So coming into Byrgenwerth, we do get a lot more of the statues, which do seem to resemble either Amygdala or potentially a Briatus in kind of maybe a more immature form. And some other statues, which we could also find in the fishing hamlet in the DLC, which almost seems to be like the figures of people potentially transforming into those later on. But that's not entirely clear. And as for what Rubito was mentioning earlier with, like, the general appearances of these Gardens of Eyes, I do think you can make that argument that they might have been transformed due to, like, some involvement with Rom. But it could also just be, like, just a bunch of generalized experiments that Rom was also afflicted with and may have been a bit more successful than, like, these variants here. It's pretty up in the air about that. So here we do finally get to see that moon, and as I pointed out way earlier in the other stream, like, when we were in the Forbidden Woods and looked over Byrgenwerth, we couldn't see this moon over this lake past the college at all. It was way back over there towards Yharnam, which we can't make out from this location. And when we were in the Forbidden Graves, the moon would have been, like, closer towards, like, that direction or, like, over here. So developer oversight with that, and if the state of the moon changed in this location after we defeated Rom, I would have just argued that, well, maybe it's Rom that's just kind of fooling us into seeing something that's not really there. So Rubito says, transformed in the presence of a great one like Haas. Yeah, and potentially, like, that's a good point with, like, how the residents of the fishing hamlet seem to resemble all the fish people. So potentially saying that Rom could have been, or the Garden of Ice could have been something like that, but just a variation of what would happen with Rom, I think is a pretty fair reading as well. Unfortunately, no matter like what reading you really choose to prefer, there's no concrete reinforcement for it, just like our best guesses at that. And so this hellishly creepy monster we can call either a celestial centipede or a fluorescent flower. This is another type of kin enemy, just like the Gardens of Eyes and the Brain Suckers. I'm not so sure if it's weak to thrust like the others. Seems to be a little more effective, but yeah, it's a bit more effective. But the most damage you can do typically comes from like blood tinge builds, which we're not going to be running, and we don't really have any access to the blood tinge weapons like that. There is that executioner wheel, or the Vulgarius wheel rather, but that's also more of a strength-based weapon. It costs a hell of a lot of echoes at this point in the game. So, one of the notable things about these fluorescent flowers is, despite like me kind of cheesing it by standing behind it, like most big enemies, it's unclear as to whether or not this was related to humans in any form, or if it was literally like a millipede that exposed to the blood. It has these kind of weird acid gastric attacks that seem to almost be blood, and when you do like stab it and hit it, it does have that kind of essential silvery appearance that matches the other kin type enemies. I think it should be very clear that at some point this must have been exposed to the blood or eating things that had blood, just because it does have a gigantic mouth and many rows of teeth. If we do gain our distance from it, it can shoot this kind of a cosmically arcane attack. It seems to be like a fiery meteor. I'm not so sure if it uses the same assets as Rom's attacks, or like the Black Sky Eye. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if it did, but it just seems to be more of an actual fireball than those. Oh. Those attacks finally shown off. Unfortunately, I did not get to show it off very well, but there is like a kind of a obviously like glowing flower at the very top of it. In the Chalice dungeons, when you do defeat some of them, the flowers can fall to the ground, and maybe parts of the head as well, and it does have like a kind of unique appearance. It's a little bit hard to describe. It almost looks like a kind of separate bug almost, and it sort of resembles I can't think of what it is off the top of my head, so I'll probably just have to leave it there. So you never notice how the wings resemble Ebrietis, but they also look like spider legs. I think probably at some point in development they might have originally been more related to the amygdalae, just because they have kind of similar looking eyes on the inside, like the gigantic head, and the extra limbs I think would be more of a giveaway. And the tails as well, which are a little bit hard to show off, and I'll try to show that off on the next one. I think it resembles that of an amygdala more than Rom, especially. Scully Baba says, you don't think this is once human because it doesn't leave behind a corpse. There's a few enemies that don't leave behind corpses. I think part of it might have just been due to like how much of a tax it would have been on the system to like try and ragdoll some of them. But it's really hard to say for sure. Corpse lore is one of the things that's pretty interesting to try to take a look at, but really hard to draw conclusions from. So the infamous ragdoll physics of Bloodborne is a bit hard to work with, and so if you do look at that tail, I think it does kind of resemble that of an amygdala. Spiders typically don't have tails. Maybe it's supposed to be related to like the kind of celestial larvae that we see in the Upper Cathedral Ward, or the one that Ariana births. or maybe even like some of the infant experiments that we're about to see as we go into Byrgenwerth itself. So we did get some more sedatives, which is a pretty good reinforcement of what we talked about yesterday, that Byrgenwerth was studying the Chalice dungeons, the underground tombs, and in their studies they would encounter arcane things that would cause people to go mad or become frenzied, and so they came up with this sedative as a way to kind of counteract the supernatural forces that they were coming into exposure with. So now we do get those in Byrgenwerth itself, so that is kind of reinforced. This is a Byrgenwerth staple. This is a very quick shortcut door, and as we go inside we will be able to find an enemy NPC that is hostile upon us entering. So her name is Yuri of the Choir, and I'm not sure if that name is like 100% fully canon. It does come from like the guidebook, and there is a little bit of a controversy as to the nature of those names and just how canon they are. For ease of like discussion, I'm going to call her Yuri, but just want to throw that out there. We do get a pearl slug, and I will talk about those hopefully after we kill her. So this is Yuri. She's wearing the fire set. She uses the third cane like me. Oh, should have healed. Wasn't paying attention. You can normally cheese the kind of hunter NPCs if you get them like closer to a wall. R1 spam them, then shoot your gun a few times while you recover your stamina to just keep R1 spamming them. So I was a little bit sloppy with that, so you forgot to use the auger? Yeah, and so the auger of Abriatus, which you just used right there, and don't remember if that's like the finishing blow she used on me, but it was just something like she's using after I died. It shoots out like the tendrils of Abriatus, the great one that the choir came into contact with. And it just shows, okay, that's what it was right there. I thought that should be true. And because I am doing the foreign guard run, I do take a lot more damage. It's a bit of a cheap method, but it's effective, so it's what I like to do. So from Yuri, we get some blue elixirs, which does reinforce that like the choir, one of the top echelons of the healing church, uses blue elixirs in their experiments in like the upper cathedral ward, and we will see a bit more of that later on. And let's go ahead and look at the pearl slug and then the blue elixir just to reinforce what we just picked up. So this is the pearl slug. It's material used in a holy chalice ritual. Of all the strange life forms that reside in the nooks and crannies of the old labyrinth, the slugs are clear signs of the left behind great ones. So just as a quick translation note, in Japanese, things are not always specified as being singular or plural very often, especially compared to English. So the Japanese for this, it's a bit unclear as to whether or not it was supposed to be talking about a singular great one or multiple great ones. I think when you look at the pearl slug in conjunction with the auger of Abriatus, it should be very, very clear that the left behind great one is a singular reference to Abriatus herself. So I think that these pearl slugs, which we use to access like the eyes chalices, is supposed to be a sign for Byrgenwerth's initial forays into the chalice dungeons that were most likely related to eyes and Abriatus specifically, which the choir would later go on to follow in their methods of research. So Ruby says Bloodborne has shitty frame rate as it is. you forgot she used the auger. She's not the only one, is she? No, most of like the full-on like church hunters use the auger as well. I'm pretty sure Edgar does. Mikolash does as well. But I think those are like the only ones. Oh yeah, and of course the imposter Yosefka does as well. And Yuri could also use a Call Beyond, which is a staple of the choir. I did not show that off, so it's not a terribly big deal. It just shoots like a bunch of like lasers out, and we'll talk about that more when we do get the item or when we fight Mikolash. So from this we'll get the student set, and then I'll go ahead and like explore the rest of Byrgenwerth, starting from the ground floor. Because there's a lot of really interesting small details to look at to help kind of understand what they were doing here. So let's get that student set. So this is the student uniform. It's a uniform of the students of Byrgenwerth, a bygone institution of learning. Features a thick cape. The Healing Church has its roots in Byrgenwerth and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. The focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension, would surely bring Master Willem to despair, if only he knew. The final line is slightly different, but overall it's the same. I don't remember if there's anything else super different about that. Let me pull that up real quick. So, merely mimicking Byrgenwerth's appearance without knowledge, without philosophy, just how heartbroken would Headmaster Willem be? So, for the most part, pretty similar, but I feel like the Japanese is just a bit clearer, and the English is maybe just a little bit too flowery for my preferences, but that's just me personally. And then the trousers are pretty much exactly the same, just they don't have a cape because they're a pair of pants. So, coming into the college itself, we do get some more of these auxiliary spheres, which we were able to see in the Erden Chapel, like private library. And then there's a bunch of like jars filled with like potentially ritual materials and blood. So these ones over here are like filled with a bunch of eyeballs and maybe a fetus. And when we look down here, we can see an infant experiment. And if you look really closely, although this isn't the best angle, it almost looks like there's skulls coming out of the front of it. It's kind of like a pinkish and green color at different times, so it's a bit of a mystery as to whether or not this like infant was infected with like ashen blood or some other ailment before. I think it's likely that Byrgenwerth may have come into contact with things like the red jellies or the bastards of Loran while they were exploring the chalices, and that might have like tipped them off into trying to experiment on infants. So one of the reasons we do know that this is an infant experiment specifically is due to the art book kind of having like a full-on like sketch drawing of this to just kind of highlight it and being labeled as infant experiments on there. And there's two varieties of those, and I'm pretty sure like one of the cages over here has another one. So, damn it, that's not what I wanted. There's another one over here, and this one should have both variants. Okay. So this other infant experiment is a lot more white. It's pretty hard to see from this angle, unfortunately, especially with all these books. If I make like too much of a movement, it'll like kind of fall apart like the other ones did. So these things also do resemble the kind of celestial larvae that Ariana has, and the ones we can find up in Upper Cathedral Ward. In the artwork book, they are shown to have like the spindly little wings on them, but these 3D models don't really have them. So I think like the truth of what they're supposed to show is probably like in between the two. So that one might have like a better angle for those like kind of skull-like shapes that I was talking about before. I think that's probably related to the idea of like souls and spirits being stuck within the blood, like the undying wills, the blood echoes, and I think that gets highlighted a bit more when we look at the higher tiers of ritual blood, like ritual blood tier 5, when it has the skull coming out of it. So Scully Baba says, so if you're assuming Yurie is a Japanese name, Yuri means lily, which is why you see it so much in Yuri anime. Yurie would mean Grace of the Lily, but I think it would depend on the kanji used in her name. Right, and so the German spy did say, like, the guide makers did make up some of the names on their own. I don't necessarily know if, like, Yuri or Edgar were noted from, like, From Software themselves. Looking at the internal files of the game, they don't really have any specific like designations to give like a better clue as to who they were, unfortunately. And Winter Lanterns, a German spy did say, is like something that they came up with, but I feel like that's a perfectly fine translation for like Hozuki, which is what it's called in Japanese, and it is a type of like plant, so it is a winter lantern, or I'm trying to remember what else it's called, but you could look it up really quickly on Google if you're super curious about that. He said, apparently, according to the official strategy guide, her name is Yuri the Last Scholar, right? And that's the guy that I'm talking about. A German spy is one of the people who worked on it with Epic Name Bro. So that's where I'm getting that information from. So I am a bit curious as to whether or not Yuri is something they came up with on their own, like the Western guide writers, versus something that they were given notes on specifically from Software, because it does shed a lot of mystery on the role of Edgar and the like supposed like schism between the School of Mensis and the choir. I personally don't think there's as much of a schism as some believe. I don't think there's enough like damage to kind of really justify that interpretation for me personally, especially when it seems like the School of Mensis is fine with using like a bunch of the kids for transporting them to the Nightmare of Mensis, and it doesn't seem as though it was done like forcibly, although who really knows. Oh no, it's all good. That you didn't realize. We're all here to learn, and I'm definitely fine with your guys' contribution. It's very easy for me to make mistakes or misremember things, and if you want to bring up the full sources, I'm fully supportive of that, because sometimes I'll neglect to do so as well, unintentionally. So coming up to Willem's desk, we can see this is probably the desk in the cutscene, although I think Lance McDonald showed off, like, they just kind of cut and pasted this section of the room like underneath the Grand Cathedral for it. Nonetheless, you can, like, this is pretty much like exactly what it was. You can find a version of this in the what's it called, the lecture building, and this is most likely Headmaster Willem's desk. It's got the smaller varieties of those statues I talked about earlier. Some more messengers, this time holding up a note, which I find to be really cute and interesting. And then there's like a kind of like floral design on the back of the desk, the head of it, whatever you want to call it. It's more auxiliary spheres and just books strewn about. So this was a college at some point, and the lecture hall should have been somewhere near the main campus of Byrgenwerth, but it got sucked into the Nightmare. How exactly that happened, we do not know. And so that's why, despite this being a college itself, there aren't like a ton of books or as many as one might expect, and there aren't any classrooms in this section of Byrgenwerth. So coming up to the next story, we will find a few more lore notes, and I'll have a lot to say about both. So the spider hides all manner of rituals, certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared. So I don't remember if I looked at the Korean of this. I think I have it on my spreadsheet actually. Okay, so interestingly enough, the Korean is closer to the Japanese, and so it seems more like the English just got things a little bit wrong. So the Japanese is a little bit closer to the spider hides all rituals. They must not be exposed. The insightful truth is something not everyone needs to understand. And there's a little bit of a caveat to what I mean by the insightful truth. When we look at the kanji for it, it does literally mean enlightenment, like keimo, but in this instance it's called keimo teki, which does like turn it into an adjective, so it is like an enlightening truth. but the reason why I'm saying it's insightful truth in this context is because that's what they called the insight stat in Japanese. So the way that I interpret this note to be would be that if one had enough insight, they would be able to glimpse the kind of rituals that are being hidden by the spider. And I think that really comes into play when you get 60 points of insight and you can hear Murgo's cries throughout the night, because that is related to the nightmare ritual, which the School of Mensis is using to beckon the moon. So if you do have that level of insight, the rituals can be kind of interacted with, but you still won't be able to go through Yahar'gul to put an end to the rituals. So this is kind of revealing to us that if we did visit Yahar'gul first, and we knew that we needed to stop the ritual of the cries of the nightmare newborn, that we would that they're being hidden by the Byrgenwerth spider, and that's extremely hard to pick up on, and part of that is just due to the translation of the text. So that's it for that one, and then we're going to see the most ambiguous note in the game, and probably like one of the longer monologues that I'll have to say about translation, just because this is a bit impactful in its various implications. When the red moon hangs low, the line between man and beast is blurred, and when the great ones descend, a womb will be blessed with a child. So this, at first glance, does seem to be like pretty straightforward, all things considered. However, in the Japanese text, like the final line is extremely ambiguous and can be read 6 different ways. So I'll just go ahead and read the first portion. It'll be like, when the red moon comes close, the boundaries of man becomes blurred. And so this next part can change like up to 6 different ways. And the revered superior being or beings appears, and either shall embrace our infants, and the great ones may embrace our infants, and the great ones cannot embrace our infants, and the great ones may embrace us infants, and the great ones cannot embrace us infants, and we may embrace an infant, and we cannot embrace an infant. So I apologize if that's a little bit confusing right off the rip, just put all out together like that. The Korean version of this note is closer to, when the red moon comes close, the barrier between man and beast disappears. When the revered great one or ones appear, our child will be conceived. So it's much closer to the English. You wouldn't really get a Japanese to Korean. Sorry, let me rephrase that. You really wouldn't get like the Korean version not matching up with the Japanese, but matching up with the English normally. So this leads me to believe that this note is probably revised at some point. And so this idea about children being conceived was probably a bit more relevant in an earlier draft of the story, but as they went on, it got reduced in importance a little bit. And so going back to all the other like different interpretations of it, so this idea that when the red moon comes close is relevant for this night of the hunt, because the red moon is present even now. It is just being concealed to us by Rom, and once we do defeat Rom, that red moon will be revealed. And the note in Yahar'gul is supposed to have made that clear, although Miyazaki himself has admitted in an interview that it really didn't come across as well as he would have liked, and it was probably really hard to understand. So the idea of conceiving children isn't probably as likely as it was earlier in development. So I think the idea is probably closer to the great one appears and shall embrace our infant, or just that would be relevant in the sense that like Murgo's cries are beckoning the moon presence on this night of the hunt, which is exacerbating the scourge of beasts because of its proximity, causing everyone to go mad quicker. Another interpretation of that could be, if the great ones do descend and they cannot embrace our infants, that might have been because, at least for this case, like they took Murgo into the nightmare, although I don't think this interpretation is very likely. Some people believe that Murgo is formless, and so if the Great Ones cannot embrace infants or something like that, it could just be because like the infants have been lost as children of blood, and so it might be a bit fruitless to have like a Great One search for a surrogate infant. I don't really believe that interpretation much at all, and I think that kind of goes against the context of the game. So the other altering interpretation would be that the Great Ones may embrace us infants, and that does become relevant when we look at the third ending and the second endings of the game, where once we fight the Moon Presence or like defeat Gehrman and allow the Moon Presence to descend, it kind of reaches down and grabs the player in both hands and then draws it close to itself as though it is embracing us, either to possess us as like a surrogate for the host of the Hunter's Dream, or potentially to make us like a surrogate infant for the Moon Presence itself. It's a little bit unclear, but I do think that that interpretation is able to be supported with what we have in the game. And so the last one, the fourth one would be that the Great Ones cannot embrace us infants, and that would only be relevant if you took the 3 third chords to become like able to resist the Moon Presence, so I don't think that this interpretation is very likely. So for the final two is once the Great Ones appear, we may embrace an infant. That could be a potential way of getting a child of blood and would align more with like this current version of the text, where we may be blessed with the child. And then the last portion would be, and we cannot embrace an infant, and that might be just because like once the moon comes down and like appears, like it messes with the children that are being born, and they might be nightmare children instead. It's a bit unclear, but I think that interpretation is also possible if you wanted to entertain the idea of like Murgo being that nightmare infant. But yeah, that's really a whole lot of words to make some very like kind of minor differences, but I think the overall implications are pretty major in how we come to understand like the final endings of the game and just the mechanics of Transcension in general. So if you guys have any questions about that, feel free to ask. I know that's like a lot to just kind of parse together and absorb at once. So coming up to the second story, we can hear like a garden of eyes above us, and then we get the Lunarium key, which will allow us access to the platform where Willem is hanging out right now. So this is a key to the Lunarium facing the lake on the second floor of Byrgenwerth College. In his final years, Master Willem was fond of the lookout and the rocking chair that he kept there for meditation. In the end, it is said he left his secret with the lake. Hold up, that desk is so tall. Whose desk was that? This one? It's probably like Gehrman or Maria's, because you know how well the player model stacks up to like Gehrman's model and like Maria in their fight. So the player is a pygmy, essentially. Dark Souls link confirmed. We are the furtive pygmy. Oh yes, I was looking at the key. So there is a pretty big difference in the final line there. Instead of saying in the end it is said he left his secret with the lake, the Japanese is a lot clearer in that it says that it was said that he hid his secret in the lake, which gives Willem a much more active component as to what is going on with the Moonside Lake and potentially like his involvement with Rom. So that might also be why he points to it later on, but it's a bit of a mystery how that all truly ties together. So coming up here, we will be entering like an observatory, although like the telescope seems to be missing. I was wondering why that seemed so loud today. Okay. So we get the empty phantasm shell, which is a hunter tool, along with like the beast drawer, and this is like our first kind of a insight into like phantasms in general. So the empty invertebrate shell that is said to be a familiar of a great one. The Healing Church has discovered a great variety of invertebrates, or phantasms as they are called. Shells with slime still harbor arcane power and can be rubbed on weapons to imbue them with their strength. So the Japanese for this is rather than just like an empty phantasm shell, it's a bit clearer in that it's like the molting of a phantasm. So like this is their empty shell of like of a molting, that of like an insect or something like that. Like spiders molt, crabs molt, invertebrates molt, and this goes in line with that phantasms being described as invertebrates. To be a bit more clear in the Japanese for it, they're called Nantai Dobutsu, which is more like literally it would be like a soft-bodied organism, but apparently like Nantai is the way that they say like mollusks. So phantasms should be understood as being mollusks first and foremost. So that idea of like great ones being connected to the sea does get a bit reinforced when phantasms are described as being mollusks, and mollusks are associated with the sea in real life. What I want to point out is rather than saying that this shell is said to be the familiar of a great one, the Japanese uses like maibure, which is the exact same term that they use for like calling it an augur of Ebrietis or something like that. I don't know why they chose familiar in this context. I'm pretty sure that there was a little bit of a wording difference in some of the what are they called? The phantasm item descriptions from the very first patch of the game, so it does seem to have been altered a bit. But I still don't know why they wouldn't have gone ahead and fixed this. So you know what else is a mollusk? A snail, yes, as well as like millipedes and no, I thought snails were like gastropods, and so they were a little bit different. But I know that they're all invertebrates. I'm a little note. I am not a zoologist, so if anybody is a bit more knowledgeable on the subject, by all means, go ahead and share. You'll do another Google, but that's what the omniscient Google told you. Yeah, I really don't know how the phylum of the animal kingdom breaks down very well, especially like when you look at like kingdoms and classes and things like that. The class Gastropoda and phylum Mollusca. Okay, includes the groups pertaining to snails and slugs. So okay, just like squares and rectangles and polygons and quadrangles. Okay. I'll try to remember that, but I'll probably forget, to be quite honest. And so the last part I wanted to talk about with the invertebrates and the phantasms would be like the idea that these phantasms are related to spirits is kind of also implied with the Japanese. Let me try to look up the term for it. So, seirei, like that's another way of saying like a spirit or a ghost, which is kind of like an alternate way of saying ghost in Japanese. Just like phantasm can be understood as another way of saying like a ghost or a spirit in English. So there is that kind of like a cross-cultural, what do I want to say, like concept that was kept between the two versions of the game. So I do appreciate that. And so that idea of the Healing Church equating phantasms to ghosts is pretty interesting to me. So it seems like, as far as like the afterlife of Bloodborne is concerned, I would argue it's most likely dealt with like the nightmare realms and the dreams, and like the blood echoes all kind of meshing together to create those nightmares. And when we do go into like the nightmare frontier, we can find what may be like native creatures there, like the crawlers might be a native thing, and so phantasms in general might have originally come from the nightmares, and that's just kind of my conjecture about that. You definitely don't have to take that as canon or anything like that. I think it's just very likely that there is that kind of a what's the word, like trans-dimensional divide that seems to be bridged by phantasms in general. So Scully says Phantasm is also probably a reference to the 1979 movie of the same name. The plot is similar, no cosmic elements though, to that of Bloodborne's. Interesting. Phantasm. Okay, I'm probably gonna have to look that up because that's the first time I'm hearing about that. I know like Brotherhood of the Wolf is often cited as being very similar as well. You say the residents of a small town have begun dying under strange circumstances, leading young Mike to investigate. Almost sounds like film noir with that description. But okay, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'll definitely try to remember to look that up on my free time. I think that was all I wanted to say about the Phantasms, and then to reinforce what I've said on previous streams, this idea of the arcane being affiliated with Great Ones does get reinforced here. The idea of the Eldritch Truth being the same thing as the arcane, and the Carol Rune's power coming from the arcane is just also kind of reinforced that like the Phantasm shells also have arcane power, and they're probably all connected in that kind of a general way. And once we do defeat Rom, we'll get Kin Cold Blood, which just kind of reinforces the idea of the arcane being affiliated with everything, and we'll talk about that more in hopefully just a bit. So for the Rom fight, we can summon another NPC, Damien of Mensis. This NPC was added in the Old Hunters DLC patch, so he wasn't in the base game. So as to why a member of Mensis would want to kill Rom, which might be hiding the ritual which Mensis is using for their own benefit, is a bit of a mystery. The way that I tend to perceive the kind of additional Old Hunter summonable NPCs is they might have the exact same role as our player character does, and they might be like this, like the player character of their kind of world. And so it is a bit messy trying to like describe that kind of multiverse theory, but I personally don't place like a ton of lore significance on those NPCs. The only ones that I really will kind of take to be as more of canon would be Gascoigne and Alfred, whom we can summon with the Beckoning Bell in like the very first version of the game, the base disc 1.0. And they were later modified to be summoned with the Old Hunter Bell, so just a little bit of a note on that. So coming out to the Lunarium, we can very obviously see the moon, and then we can also finally come into contact with Master Willem. Examining him, he's wearing these kind of very ornate, regal, flowing robes. One would almost expect that he would be the leader of the Healing Church. Certainly not just like the provost or the headmaster of a college. Although, I suppose that really does flow quite naturally with what the colleges do with our tuition money anyway, so who am I to say? And if we do talk to him, he really doesn't have much to say right now. And if we look at like the back of his head, he seems to almost be having like this fungal growth coming out of it. I think this growth is similar to what we can find on Ebrietas. And when we do attack Willem and kill him, we'll get the eye rune, which should show that it came from Ebrietas as well. So it's very likely that he might have been normal at some point, but I think contact with Ebrietas may have transformed him into this kind of a not let's just say more of like a vegetative state. And that might also be related to why Rom is like the vacuous spider, although not a ton to go with that. So when we do talk to Willem, we do gain some more ambient insight. So right now I've got 6 insight, and then he'll point to the moon, and we should get, I think, 2 more points. So our meter has been increased to 8 points of insight, and he'll have nothing new to say. He just kind of points us to this platform, which gives us our hint as to the next area where we should go, which is a complete no-no for anybody who's played like Dark Souls games. Like, never ever jump in the water because you're always going to die. This is kind of a subversion of those expectations done well. So now that Willem is done with his role here, we can go and kill him for his eye rune unprovoked. When we do strike him, he does bleed that kind of very silver blood. He is not a kin though. When we look at Willem's appearance, he does seem to be somewhat similar to the Slime Scholars, although he seems to be a bit more solid. The concept art for Willem does make him look almost nearly identical to the Slime Scholars, and that might be why he had that kind of a covering for his eyes. I don't know if they walked that idea back throughout development. Like the idea of Willem as a character was modified quite a bit. He did share the same role as Mikolash early on in the game, but it's kind of up in the air really. There was a potential boss fight with him where he'd like summon eyes to shoot the player with, but if you're really interested in that, Lance McDonald did a cut content video detailing all of those kind of things on his YouTube channel, which I highly recommend. So here we get the eye rune, and I think this is the highest tier of it actually, which is kind of interesting. So this is a secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Byrgenwerth. A transcription of I, as spoken by Left Behind Great Ones, allows one to make additional discoveries. I symbolize the truth Master Willem sought in his research. Disillusioned by the limits of human intellect, Master Willem looked to beings from higher planes for guidance, and sought to line his brain with eyes in order to elevate his thoughts. So there are some substantial differences in the eye rune. As I had mentioned earlier, that idea of things being plural or singular in Japanese isn't often like lined out clearly, so it should be clear in my opinion that this should have been more of a reference to a singular abandoned great one, Ebrietis, because we don't have any other references of other abandoned great ones or left behind great ones. So we should understand that this was literally spoken by Ebrietis and somehow seemed to become implanted into Willem's brain. I did mention the other day that on the Carol Rune Workshop tool, that the final line is different in Japanese. Instead of saying Provost William would have been proud of Carol Runes, as they do not rely upon blood in any measure. It's something closer to like actually, just let me look it up real quick. Not relying upon blood is something that is close to Headmaster Willem's ideals, and so that's a lot more ambiguous as to whether or not he would have known Carol. In the English, it makes it sound as though he could not have learned about Carol and Carol's runes. So that's a pretty substantial difference between them. And so looking back at the eye rune itself, we are able to see that it does mention the eyes on the inside. That's the same in the Japanese. I'm just trying to see if there are any other slight differences. So no, that's pretty much the same. It's just that one very small difference would be that he wanted to have his thought transcend to like a higher dimension, and so that idea of just coming into contact with beings from higher dimensions is a little bit different, and so he's fine with lining his brain with eyes on the inside to elevate them beyond this dimension, and that becomes a bit more relevant when we talk to like Mikolash and encounter everything in the Nightmare of Mensis. So, going back to chat, sorry for monologuing so much. You said, did you know he also has eyes in his head like the doll? Yeah, that I think Lance shows that off in that episode as well. So coming through that lake, which I probably should have done a better job setting up, we fall through into what almost seems to be like a completely different dimension, and we're greeted with a gigantic insect-looking monster. This is Rom the Vacuous Spider, and vacuous in this context does mean something closer to a slur to be like profoundly mentally disabled. It does use a bit of an archaic term in Japanese, so that's also why I think they used a bit of an archaic term for that, matching it in English. So some people interpreted like the vacuous part to be maybe like the inside of her is vacuous, or her role is to create like a vacuum that deals with sound. But unfortunately, like the Japanese just kind of negates those potential readings. When we examine the face of Rom itself, it is covered with a bunch of eyes that don't really seem to be like coordinated in where they're looking. They're just kind of going everywhere. It's got this tiny little mouth. It almost seems to be kind of pathetic in the way that it's presented to us. Notably, it is a docile enemy. It is not immediately aggro towards the player. One moment. And its body is covered with like this kind of glowing flora and potentially like tomb mold-esque thing. Like this doesn't really match up with anything else that we can find in the game. I wish there was something more that gave us a bit of a hint as to what it was. The staff that Willem was carrying kind of more or less resembles like cold blood flower buds. We could see like the brilliant choppy frame rate on display looking at its tails. So there does seem to be like a kind of a relationship between like invertebrates and flowers in general, and phantasms and flowers, which does get repeated with the milkweed rune. Rom does have these tiny little legs. Some people have theorized like these bigger holes are probably for bigger legs at some point in development, and that Rom had longer legs, and then FromSoft got rid of them because it was too hard for the player to hit her. Lance McDonald has said he's found no indication of that whatsoever, and that's just kind of more or less headcanon from the parts of players. And going back to the idea of like butterflies and things like that, some people have theorized that Rom is a kind of cocoon or in like a larval state in the midst of transcending into something greater. Some people also believe that Rom herself is not a fully fledged Great One, and I will vehemently disagree with that, because when we do defeat her, the trophy that we get clearly specifies that we defeated Rom, like the Great One, Rom the Vacuous Spider. So she is a fully fledged Great One. There's nothing to say that she failed in Transcension, or that Transcension will lift something to be like greater than Rom. And a lot of people take that idea that she's not a Great One from the fact that she drops Ken Coldblood after we kill her. And I'll talk about that more as well once we do defeat her. But as for now, I'll try to go ahead and cheese the fight, although I think with the cane, I've never really had much luck with it. And just as a quick aside, if you do attack Rom's like body over here, it will bleed a red blood. But if you strike her head, it bleeds a very like silverish kin type blood. And I don't really know if there's a good reason for why Rom has two different types of blood or anything like that. We can see, as Rubito like pointed out earlier, like her head does kind of resemble that of a Garden of Ice. It also kind of resembles that of an Adella. And that might have been like why there's such a connection between those kinds of enemies. But other than that, there's really not too much else I can think to say right now, so we're going to go ahead and start the fight. She is docile, and so a lot of people think that like killing Rom is something that wasn't necessary, but killing her is necessary for us to lift the veil over Yahar'gul to allow us to proceed into the Nightmare of Mensis through the mummified corpse of Mikolash. So she's a very necessary boss to defeat, and we're not bad for killing her. She's kind of bad for allowing the veil to continue, and for the people of Yharnam to continue to go mad and transform over the night, because the School of Mensis is beckoning the moon presence towards Yharnam. So this is kind of a necessary evil that we have to commit to bring an end to the Night of the Hunt. So here we go. Oh, I totally forget that she spawns spiders at the very beginning of the first phase. She just doesn't have arcane attacks. So, yep. Right now we do see like a bunch of like romlings, which does kind of call into question the idea that every great one loses its child, because these are certainly the children of Rom. In this portion of the fight, Rom is still docile when you like bring her down to like a 2/3 of her HP. She will kind of try to warp away arcane attacks over herself. So now I'm just gonna try to wait for the Beasthood thing to completely wear off. So Devin guys back in chat, nice to see you again. You said they can drop Madman's knowledges as well, which is curious. Thanks for bringing that up. That's something that I kind of forget, but you are certainly right with that. And they can even drop it in the midst of the boss fight, and so that is just a little bit interesting. And all right. So right now I'm hitting her head to kind of build up that Beasthood meter. I guess I can't apply. Oh, I switched my weapon. Oh, I missed. That's unfortunate. So this is the second phase of Rom. She will have more of those arcane attacks, which I had mentioned, which makes it a lot more tedious to deal with her. Which is why it's pretty desirable to kind of cheese the fight. And as you can see with even like her spiderlings, like their heads are much more resistant to damage, and it's their bodies which the player needs to attack to kill them quickly. Since these are kin type enemies, they are really weak to bolt type damage. That is kind of something that recurs for all of the kin type enemies that we find. And so it's really important to like keep your eye on Rom herself as you go through this fight, because she will attack from a range. Those kind of meteors that'll fall down right there. And then she has this attack right there where she can summon meteors out of the water, which might be a kind of like mercury, like certainly not regular water, because it's a little bit hard to walk on water in real life, and this might tie into the idea of like impurities sinking to the bottom of water, and all of that kind of Shinto-esque stuff that I mentioned on the previous stream. So, Devin says their heads are like stone, and the stone in Abratus is also pure stone despite being a Rom corpse. Yeah, and so I think there is that connection between Rom and Abratus, certainly, and I think the idea of the eye rune being related to Willem and Willem's secret being hid in the lake might also be relevant. So I did a significant amount of damage there, just wasn't enough to keep her stun locked, unfortunately. Yeah, and I didn't mean to roll there, like kind of, like you have to time that right, it's just easier to sprint around everything. Because getting caught with the rolls can be a little bit disastrous, especially with the foreign garb. Because she deals arcane damage, which is pretty rare. So like you can wear the student set too. Oh shit, reduce like a lot of it. Oh, that was a bit lucky. So as you can see, this can be a very tedious fight. There is like the hit and run strategy, but if I'm just trying to get it all done in one go. It's a bit smarter to just go at it methodically. I've seen way too many people get a bit impatient towards the end and get caught when Rom will have like very little health left. Or not even just like from Rom, just like one of the spiderlings and their kind of lunging attacks, which do a lot of damage. Oh shit, it's this one. Okay. I thought she was doing it from the ground. But if I do get enough of the spiders over, I might go ahead for the hit and runs. When they do kind of burrow in the ground like that, they do become super vulnerable for a second. So this should be about it for now. No Madman's knowledges, unfortunately. So she does have... Oh my goodness. Oh god damn it, it really did kill me. Some melee attacks in her later phases as well. So all of that effort for nothing. Devin asks, is there any Japanese stuff akin to the Lake of Mercury, or is that purely an H.P. Lovecraft thing? That's more of a Lovecraftian thing, I suppose. Mercury is known as like a kind of a alchemical solution that reveals like the true nature of things. It is related to like the moon in a lot of things. I don't believe that's originally like a Chinese or an Eastern philosophy kind of thing, but I know like the idea of alchemy really did take off in the kind of public imaginations of like a lot of the literary folks in Japan. So Scully says it's extremely interesting to say you have to kill Rom despite the fact that she isn't hostile towards you, because she's still an indirect force to keep the world in its current bestial state. Yeah, so that's like the kind of best way that I could justify our seemingly abhorrent actions. And it is our kind of a mission for this night of the hunt to bring an end to the hunt. And in order to do that, we must get rid of Rom to put the city back in its proper place. I still can't believe that one-shot me. I should probably up my vitality if I'm doing a dumb foreign garb run. Normally like 20-ish can sustain you through like the full game. But well, a lot of people do say like armor doesn't matter in Bloodborne. That's not only true like if you're using armor that has like a decent amount of stats on it to begin with. When you're using something like the doll set or the foreign garb, you do take a lot more damage and it becomes a lot more obvious if you do try one of these runs. Not that it's like particularly hard, I'm just saying in general. You'll end up getting like 2-shot when you wouldn't expect, or even like 1-shot when you wouldn't normally expect it. So yeah, you've never really understood that whole thing, like the whole people like talking about armor being useless. Oh no, I'm gonna die. Scully says it's just also interesting because Shinto ethics state that human beings are good and that the world is good. Evil enters the world from outside, brought by evil spirits. So even if Rom is docile to us, she's still technically be an outside evil spirit allegorically. So I wonder if there's a connection to be found there. So That's a pretty interesting point. I don't know like a ton about Shintoism, to be quite honest. Like most of what I've looked into pertaining to it has been like in the research of like Bloodborne related stuff. So as far as like evil coming from an outside source, that's partially true. But one of the more how do I want to say it, like significant parts of like Shintoism that gets related to like Bloodborne and this idea of like evil, or maybe evil's a bit of a strong term for it, but just like not good or like decaying, relates to this idea of stagnation and being locked into a certain state and denying the cycle of life to continue to fill itself, or to like to occur naturally and to come to like a natural end. So that gets related to like Sekiro, where you've got the Senpo monks, I think, or the Kongo monks, with like the centipedes in them. That relates to Dark Souls, where like Gwyn chose to link the fire rather than letting his age of fire come to a natural end. But of course, like the first Dark Souls game, like that idea of like what Gwyn did is being not necessarily bad, but bad nonetheless. I can't think of a better word right now. That only gets to be a bit more revealed in the later games, just because like the Age of Dark seems bad on the surface, but like when you get in the Dark Souls 3 and like look at the stomp endings and all of that, where like the fire will re-emerge later on. It'll just be at a different time, and so the prolonging and the linking of the flames just causes everything to like stagnate and decay and become in a terrible state overall. So that's like the real big difference, I think, in like Shintoism, is identification of evil. Like it's more of like a moral thing that sticks to people, as a maybe like more of an outside thing in these games, if that makes sense. So I'll just look back at what you say before we go ahead further. Yeah, you notice in Bloodborne there's a large spectrum of good and evil, and Bloodborne operates specifically in between those two extremes. Misguided, perhaps. Yeah, and like the idea of traditional morality, like playing a factor, is a bit more removed in these games, just because if the goal is to transcend humanity, is it really appropriate to judge everybody with the morals of current humans, or should they be judged in accordance with like higher tier morality, or something like along those lines? Like we don't necessarily judge lions or tigers for like killing their prey in the jungle. So why should we like judge beasts for eating humans? It's just in their nature. I think that does tie a bit into like the false Josefka's quest as well. This is the greedy portion. Okay. So that's the hit and run strat. So each one does have its merits and or its pros and cons. So at that time it happened to work out. So all's well that ends well. Just took a little bit more time, but at least we were able to keep talking about the game as we were going along. So as I'd mentioned before, defeating Rom, she does drop Kin Coldblood. I did call Rom she because Miyazaki does reveal in one of his interviews that Rom is a female, and he thinks she's cute. So take that as you will. So this is Coldblood of an inhuman kin of the cosmos, brethren of the great ones. Use to gain unspeakable blood echoes. Dare not to delve into the world beyond humanity. The eldritch truth touched upon long ago at Byrgenwerth. I think the description for this is really flowery for the English. As far as the Japanese goes, I'll go ahead and read the entire thing since it's so brief. This is the dead blood of inhuman kin, connected to superior beings. Gain difficult to describe wills of blood from its use. Through this, beyond man, is the arcane which Byrgenwerth once encountered, or encountered long ago. So, this idea of the eldritch truth being essentially another term for the arcane is really important to understanding the idea of what Byrgenwerth was researching down in the underground tombs. And when we look at the kin cold blood in relation to like the sedatives, that makes a bunch more sense. When we see that the eye rune most likely came from Ebrietas and that Carol runes themselves have arcane power, there is that connection there. When we do gain Great One Cold Blood, we will see like the blood echoes in it, or like the whatever you want to say is inside of it does tend to resemble like a kind of cosmic, galactic kind of image that does resemble a lot of what we can see in the Madman's knowledge. And this idea of the arcane being like the active component of the cold blood does become a bit more related to nightmares in general, and it just shows like that even though Rom is a great one, like her blood doesn't necessarily mean that she's a kin. It's more likely that this is just like the amount of blood echoes within her blood. So I know that's a bit confusing. You would almost think like, well, this says it comes from inhuman kin of the cosmos, so why does that not, like, why isn't it that she just drops cold blood? I think that might have just been partially a bit of a development oversight. At least for this portion of the game, like this tier of kin cold blood is much higher than what we've received so far. You don't really receive kin cold blood of this tier in any other parts of the game. I think you only get like 10s and 11s, and the only time you do find the Great One Cold Blood, if I remember correctly, is from like the Chalice dungeons. There might be one in, or there might be some in like the DLC as well. Now that I think about it, but should double check that later on. The other thing which we did receive before going and fighting Rom, underneath like the little platform that leads out into the lake over by the celestial centipede, was the Great One's wisdom. And so this is fragments of the lost wisdom of the Great Ones, beings that might be described as gods, used to gain insight. At Byrgenwerth, Master Willem had an epiphany. We are thinking on the basis of planes. What we need are more eyes. So this does reveal some of Willem's ambitions and what his motives were in like going for more eyes on the inside. I think there's a really good potential that the fixation that Willem had of eyes on the inside might have been due to being inflicted with that eye rune from Ebrietas. It would certainly make sense that if this man has the voice of a great one that's just constantly reverberating around in his head saying I, that might have. But we don't really know that for sure. I just think that kind of resonates with what we can find in the text so far. And that idea of eyes, of course, does line up with the third umbilical cords being lined with eyes themselves. So, Barros Igari, welcome back to the stream. You said the wiki says deepest chalices only for Great One Cold Blood. Does it not show up in the DLC at all? I thought you could get one in the Hamlet, but I'm probably wrong about that, and I don't really mind if I am. Now that we have defeated Rom, it did say like Prey Slaughter. There's no like Nightmare Slain. We can see the figure of a crying woman in the distance. This is Queen Yarnum. The Thumerian Queen of Blood, although we wouldn't necessarily know that at this point in the game. And then coming up to her, we will trigger a cutscene revealing the red moon descending over Yarnum, the city. So hearing the cries of a baby accompanying the descendants of that red moon, I think is supposed to be a very clear indication that what Rom was concealing to us was part of like the baby's cries as well as like the moon itself. That does get reinforced in the future press interview that Miyazaki gave, labeled "Drained of Blood." And as we kind of leave Rom's Moonside Lake, we are teleported to the entrance of Yarhagul, and we get a prompt that states that the ritual secret is broken and to seek the Nightmare Newborn. There is a really big difference between this English version of the note and the Japanese one, and that the Japanese one is enclosed in quotes to make it seem as though that like this note is literally being spoken to the player. Perhaps the one that speaks this directly to the player's mind is none other than Queen Yarnum. We don't fully know, and this is a bit of a mystery. I think that's the most likely candidate. Otherwise, like, we'd have to favor interpretations like, oh, well, maybe the moon presence is telling the player where to go next. Maybe it's Garamond or the doll. Although one would almost think that you'd just have a voiceover for that instead. So this one is very mysterious as far as the notes go. As far as the content of it is concerned, rather than saying ritual secret broken, which I consider to be very poor English, quite frankly, it's more like the concealment of the ritual has been broken. And then the final line, I don't have a problem with. Seek the Nightmare Newborn is just like find the Nightmare Infant. So I think just ritual secret broken really just adds to how hard it was to understand like Rom's purpose throughout the night. And so now that these so-called ritual secrets have been broken, we are able to gain access to that Nightmare Newborn, which is mentioned right here. And now that Rom has been defeated and that Red Moon has descended, we could look out over Yharnam itself and see the sky boxes have changed as well. And I'll show some more of that off once we do gain access into Yarhagul as well. Some things which were initially hidden to us will now be revealed. If we had 40 points of insight earlier, we would have been able to see these amygdalae at any time. Now we can see them whenever, wherever. We will be able to hear the cries of the baby wherever we are. The music in the Hunter's Dream changes, as well as the skybox. I'm going to try to turn up the sound effects and the voice to see if we can hear the crying voice of Murgo, because sometimes it can just be a little bit hard to hear. So that was it right there. And if we did have 60 points of insight, we would have been able to hear it even before having defeated Rom, which is probably more of like a developer Easter egg as to the note in Byrgenwerth telling us that the enlightening truth or the insightful truth need not be revealed to everyone. It seems as though the School of Mensis really did not want like the commoners or potential hunters like ourselves to come in and interrupt what they were trying to conduct. Coming into Yarhagul, we will find these kind of Yarnamites popping up out of the ground, out of these blood stains. They're covered with this kind of red aura, and they will reanimate after a short period of time. And it seems as though they are being beckoned by the timbers of these bells of Thumerian madwomen. We call them chime maidens, bell maidens, etc. So we're just waiting for them to pop back up. And when you do kill them, they kind of explode in this kind of black nightmarish mist, which is most likely what's being caused to animate them. And I'll show off some of those mechanics a bit more when we get to the women. So that explosion is kind of what I'm talking about right there. And then once we defeat a bell-ringing woman, the mist will fly out of these Yarnamites on its own, and then they will no longer be able to be respawned, which is a pretty novel mechanic. In every other part of the game, you don't have respawning enemies like you do in Yarhagul, which very clearly shows that they are being reanimated by the women in this area. So there are some like patrolling Yarnamites, and I'll show those off in a second, but I do want to go and reveal like what I was talking about with the Bell Maidens first. And I'll come back through Yargul later and like describe what we see in the environment. So this is the bell ringing woman who summons these Yarnamites. And when we kill her, we will see like the mist fly out of them as well. So killing her, the mist does fly out of this Yarnamite right here, and they all do become much, much weaker to general kinds of attacks. So now that that mechanic has been shown off, I will go ahead and go back to the Hunter's Dream, level up, and then I think we'll go ahead and explore the lecture hall next, and maybe go see the False Yosef, go ahead and like finish off that quest line, since it should be done now. Oh, and maybe we'll go see Adella first, and now she might be hostile towards the player, since we had her kill Ariana. And we can see how all of the other NPCs are doing at this point in the game as well.
Welcome home, good body. Very well, let me.
Let's go ahead and go with some vitality. Oh. To ease off some of those pains of the foreign garb. No, not enough chunks. Alright. And Garriman is still missing. Maybe he'll be in the back again, and he might have more dialogue for us. But I'm a little bit skeptical. Alright. Oh, and when we are now in the Hunter's Dream, the music here is different from what it was. Before it was just kind of like a cello going on in the background. But now it's like accompanied with a voice. Not sure if there's like a ton of reason for the music changing. Probably just to show like a different world state. The skies is tinged more with red. The clouds seem to be a bit more active in the way that they're swirling around. Yet the moon still stays the same as it was. And I don't think we get any more items for having defeated Rom. So let's go back to the Cathedral Ward first and see what's going on over there.
Was it a beast? Or could someone from outside have come in? Oh.
So he still says the same thing. Ariana is still obviously dead after having been brutally murdered by Adella in a fit of jealousy. And speak of the devil, she is no longer present where she was. The lonely old deer is no longer crouched over and clutching her head.
There you are. You're early, dear. Is anything the matter? You can always tell me. Mother will make everything better.
But she is certainly not in the same state of mind, and this is probably due to the effects of the red moon over a period of time. We saw she was starting to lose her sanity once we defeated Vicar Amelia and caused the state of the night to advance. Although I'm not entirely sure how many bosses one needs to defeat to kind of cause some of the changes in the dialogue. But when you do defeat like enough of the optional ones, they do begin to say like different things, and the night does progress more and more.
What's wrong? Anything you'd like to tell me?
So you can tell her I have my share of woes or no, just like as a bit of a note in terms of the Japanese. She asked like if we're in any pain, and the way that they use pain is a bit more ambiguous as to whether it's mental or physical. So saying I have my fair share of woes kind of gets that across. I think it's just a little bit of a funny line on its own, a little bit out of place, but it works well enough for what it's supposed to do.
Oh my, you poor thing. But don't you worry. This'll help you forget. Forget your troubles. Forget your cares.
So she gives us a sedative, and then we can keep on talking to her to more or less have her keep giving us sedatives. And it is interesting that she gives us sedatives. I wondered if it was coming from her blood at first, but if you do continue on her quest line, she goes out in search of more, so it might be likely that she's not just a normal human, and she might have just gone out searching for the sedatives herself. Either way, though, I think you could make the argument that she might be a bit more normal, because I don't know, like she still has some sanity, but it's certainly not nearly what it was. So it's probably that she's only taken a relatively small portion of the blood, and so she's not quite as affected as many of the other Yarnamites, but we don't really know for sure.
Oh, what is it, dear? Are you in a bind again?
But then again, like all of that kind of laughter does reinforce that they are losing their sanity, and I think that's essentially the smoking gun that does get repeated for pretty much every character throughout some point, like some parts of their quests. Like when they really do begin laughing like that, that kind of like spells out the end for their sanity.
Oh my, you poor thing. But don't you worry. This'll help you forget. Forget your troubles. Forget your cares.
So this time she gives us 2. She'll give us 3 the next time, and beyond that, she'll only give us like 1 more, and there will be a little bit of a revelation with that. Scully asks, why does only one eye blink and the other doesn't? It's so scary you never realize that. So she does kind of have like a disfigured or disheveled looking face, which is kind of a shitty thing to say. But this does seem to be somewhat of an issue for Yarnamites. I don't really know if the blood causes this kind of a slight transfiguration. It might be part of the case of why they would have wanted to bandage their eyes to just kind of make people not be able to realize they've been afflicted by the scourge to some degree. The narrow-minded man also does have like the same kinds of features that I'm talking about here. If you go onto Meph's wiki and look at the face sliders for a lot of the Yarnamites, you can really see how clear it is for yourself. Like, unfortunately, this angle isn't the best to show off her face, just because of her little hat or her bonnet that she's wearing. And you say you think you checked it once, but you can't remember if she had eyes or not. I think she didn't, but the chapel overseer does. Yeah, they all have eyes, and I think in Bloodborne they have like different eyes. And if I don't mess around with the customizer too much, but I think you could also make settings to make the player be wall-eyed or affect their pupils and things like that. Oh, eyes in her head, you mean? Okay. Yeah, I'm not too sure. I might be able to finagle the camera to make it work, but I don't think it's too relevant. I think only like the doll and Willem had those, but we'll look at those in a moment, or try to at least.
Oh, what is it, dear? Are you in a bind again?
And again, you could say I have my share of woes.
Oh my, you poor thing. But don't you worry. This will help you forget. Forget your troubles. Forget your cares.
And then we do get some more sedatives, this time 3 of them. It does interest me that she says that they will help us forget our troubles and forget our cares. I wonder if like that is supposed to be an effect of the sedatives, or whether or not she thinks she's giving us like normal blood vials and just confusing the sedatives with them, and whether or not like amnesia or amnesic qualities is a property of the blood in general. Like we've certainly lost parts of our memory by coming to Yarnum, so it wouldn't be too terribly surprising if the Yarnamites themselves were aware of this kind of effect of the blood, but of course, if these are sedatives and like they could just be functionally similar to how sedatives work in real life, where you do kind of suppress like your nervous system to dull pain, and memory loss could be a kind of side effect of that. Although, of course, in real life, like taking blood isn't necessarily that kind of sedative, like it is in Bloodborne.
Oh, what is it, dear? Are you in a bind again? Oh my, you poor thing. Oh, now, have some patience. Mother will make everything better. Now, be patient.
So at this point in the game, she will end up finishing her quest by going out of the chapel and getting herself killed. Her body will appear like out in the back over there, and I don't think the church servants are patrolling anymore once we get into like the blood moon phase of the night. So it's a little bit of a mystery how she wound up in that state, but I mean, it's really not that surprising, especially with the way that like FromSoft really does like to end a lot of their quest lines, especially for Bloodborne. Um, this time we're going to go ahead and attack her. I think I did it last stream too, just to get a little bit more of her dialogue. She does think that she's our mother at this point in the game, and some of the content, I think she calls the player Patches as her child, so whether or not she is still currently the mother of Patches is up to player interpretation. I think we could go either way with it, and it doesn't really add or detract meaningfully from the story, so whatever you choose to prefer, I suppose. You love her, right, Grin? Okay, so hitting her.
Your father's blood.
So that line is really interesting. It's a bit different in Japanese because rather than saying it's your father's blood, she'll say something like "otosan ni nite," and that's like kind of like a runoff sentence, so it could be a bit ambiguous as to what it really means. But just based on those words alone, she might just be saying you're just like your father, and so that's substantially different from just saying like it's your father's blood. And so, uh, assuming that your father did go mad, well, not literally your father, of course, but like assuming her husband did go mad, like it, and us attacking her was a thing, like that would just kind of go lockstep and key with the general trend of Yarnamites and those who've taken the blood. So one interesting thing that I did like to note. You never thought to kill her? Yeah, it's kind of a dick move, but you know, the lore must go on. And so I do like to try to show like different aspects to quests or like interesting things that some people might not normally get to see. So from her body, we do get some more sedatives. So it could be that maybe she does have like normal human blood, but that still wouldn't explain why she's going mad over the night. So she might have only just taken a very small portion of it. So, as I did point out, like the face of this narrow-minded man is somewhat similar to the old lady's, although it's pretty hard to like fully make out. You can't really like adjust the camera angle too much more to get a better look at that. So Devin says, "Wait, what does she say when she dies there? In English or Japanese?" For English, she says it's your father's blood, and in Japanese, it's Oto-san ni nite, which is like you're just like your father, essentially. But it could mean something else. It is a like a dangling run-off sentence, which is very stylistic for the Japanese language and done extremely often, especially for like literary things. To just kind of leave. Is that nite as in niteimasu? Yeah. So I could go ahead and paste it, and you can even see like it's that kanji. So it is in chat if you want to look at it for yourself. Certainly feel free. And yeah, Devin, you must have just entered the stream a little bit after I talked about that, or you might have just been AFK. Yeah, in some of the content, the old lady does say that. I think she refers to the player directly as Patches. I need to double check it myself, but yeah. I was just saying a little bit ago that you can pretty much take it either way as to whether or not Patches is still her child in the final version of the game. I don't really think it really hurts the story that's being told as opposed to some of the other interpretations out there. Yeah, so it's exactly like Scully Baba was just saying. So I think a good translation here is I agree. So I do wonder where the idea of just like it's your father's blood came from. I wonder if it got revised at some point in development. It certainly wouldn't be the first or the last case of that kind of thing to happen. So the way that I take it is her husband might have gone mad, and that might be why she's a lonely old deer. But other than that, there's really not too much else I think we can say about her. Oh, did you have a discovery, Scully?
Ah, your lies spin a web, but I see through your deceit. I did not learn from books. No. I learned it all with my own mind.
And so this guy doesn't really say anything else for the rest of the game. It's just kind of repeats the same things. So Scully says, what if she means the reason you killed her is due to your father's blood, which is like a really indirect way of saying it's in your genes, aka you're just like your father. I think that is also a possible interpretation. And I think that's kind of implied with like the Japanese, like us attacking her is something just like our father would do, which I think does tie into what I was mentioning a little bit ago about like the general state of Yarnamites and like the transformations and going blood drunk in general. It's a super weird wording for the English translation. Yeah, I agree. But she was giving us blood, and I mean sedatives are blood, so was it literally like her husband's blood she was supposed to be giving us in the English? It's a little bit out there, and I think that's also an interesting take on things. So, Barrow says, web, huh? Like a certain spider.
Ah, your lies spin a web, but I see through your deceit. I did not learn from books. No, 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 no. I learned it all with my own mind.
Welcome to the stream. I'm gonna call you like Black Tiger, if you're fine with that. We're just looking at some of the lore of Bloodborne and comparing and contrasting some of the Japanese texts with what we can find with the English to see if there's any substantial differences and how that might influence our interpretation of the story of the game. So right now we're just finishing up with the NPCs. We've gone ahead and just defeated Rom, and now we should be able to see Adella attacking the player, which actually this is something I haven't done myself personally. It's just something I've seen in some videos, so this is a bit of a fun little thing to see. And I don't even know where she spawns. Oh, and Eileen should be missing now since we did not help her with Henrik. She should have relocated to the Grand Cathedral. And this is the amygdala, which will whisk us into the Hunter's Nightmare and gave us some frenzy earlier. Oh, you can read Chinese? No, I know enough Japanese where like I can make out a lot of kanji, and there's certainly a lot of similarities between the two languages with the characters used. So I know like the character for Black and Old or Aged and Tiger. Other side, the well? Oh, okay, okay. That's where I was going to go next, since there's nothing over here. But thank you for pointing that out. Okay, I've got enough HP. So trying to be extra cinematic here with the foreign garb and the HUD off for like these kinds of cutscenes or events, rather.
Oh, my sweet hunter. Your blood is tainted. I can't help myself.
So this idea of Adella not being able to help herself might suggest that whatever has occurred to her might have been due to the influence of something else. I think Jerk Sans Frontiers might have been the first one to theorize that it could have been due to the influence of the Formless Great One Erden, which is said like the true essence of blood is, or like its true essence comes from blood. So when we do kill Adella before like this kind of event, she has like the Erden Wraith rune, or is it the Formless Erden rune, like the lowest tier, I think. Sorry about that. She has like the lowest tier Erden Wraith rune, if I remember correctly. And so for whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be enough. Like her blood doesn't seem to be enough to kind of have like that full Eldritch liaison that Erden can have with Ariana. And so I'm not sure like if she's wielding a completely unique weapon. It might be the same kind of dagger that the Bell Maidens use. Actually, let's just try something really dumb and use a Shaman Bone Blade on her. Because I did pick one up. I fully don't expect anything to come of this, but okay, it looks like she can't aggro inside. Or maybe she can. Okay, no. So Barrow says, is that the animation we use for the Shaman Bone Blades? Actually, we'll look out and see if it matches up in a second. What if she kills you? You know what? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that too, just to see if like she'll gain our blood echoes or something. I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't. Okay, I did just level up, so. Oh my god, she does not do much damage at all. So we're gonna be here for a moment. You'd think with just my foreign garb she'd do a little bit more damage. Oh, actually... I literally don't think that made a difference whatsoever. So 8 points of damage. Oh, 7 points. A lot of resistance. Maybe use the dogs down the stairs. At this point, I'll like just using the emergency bullets. It'd probably be enough. I know this is the thrilling gameplay that really attracts the Bloodborne audience. So about 4 more hits.
I will never leave your side.
The one time Bloodborne decides to be incredibly forgiving with regard to damage output. I know, right? I don't know, this is pretty fun. I've definitely like never messed around with this, so it's different enough for me to keep me entertained. And our blood echoes are on the ground, which really does not surprise me. I don't think she'd be able to pick them up. She doesn't repeat her dialogue. She says, "I'll never leave your side." So yeah, I don't know if Jerksands Frontier or like Redgrave or somebody else was the first one to mention it, but they wondered if part of the reason why Adella does go crazy is because Erden and his surreptitious followers inadvertently seek the precious blood, and so if she is one of those inadvertent worshippers of Erden, she might have been forced to kind of spill Ariana's blood because of his influence, and it might have just taken like her inherent like jealousy to kind of be the kind of catalyst to trigger that. So it's not entirely clear how that works out, but it is fascinating to think about. I'm not sure if I personally buy that theory, but it's one that I certainly enjoy having been like brought to the community. So I will never leave your side. Is she infatuated with the hunter? I think that's a fair reading one can make. I don't necessarily know if like it's supposed to always be interpreted as like feelings of like romantic love, just because like the gender and or like the orientation of like the protagonist isn't necessarily like set in stone, but she certainly reveres the hunter for having saved her life and being a hunter as a figure worth idolization to some degree. So she does have an inferiority complex for sure. When we can see her like stopping what she's doing to kind of eavesdrop on when the player talks to Ariana to get her blood vials. So she's very self-conscious as to the state of her blood, which she describes as being lowly, versus the blood of a whore, Ariana's, being of a higher quality than hers. Whether she realizes that Ariana's blood is of a higher quality, we don't really know. But I'm sure like the difference in the societal standing between them might have been like why she became fueled with like a bloodlusting rage as to why she would go ahead and try to murder Ariana in cold blood. I suppose pun intended now that I think about it. But it does really make you wonder how she even managed to kill Ariana if she's already like this pathetic and so uncoordinated. Maybe I should have hit her more. I don't know if she had any more dialogue. So yeah, we do get that Erden Writhe rune, and I'll go ahead and read those Erden runes just to kind of reinforce what I was talking about. So this is the Formless Erden rune, which we can get from the top of the chapel. It says, human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade and the essence of the Formless Great One Erden. Both Erden and his inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. Oh, I totally forgot to use the Shaman Bone Blade on her, just to see if she'd even aggro like other enemies, but F's in the chat, thank you guys. Skelly says the hunter did rescue her, if you remember correctly. Perhaps she kills the hunter because she believes it will facilitate transcendence. She'll never leave the hunter's side out of loyalty. So, yeah, it just shows and not in the best of mental states. And I think that does get reinforced that, like, her mental state degrades along with the emergence of the red moon, the blood moon, the pale blood sky, because while she did kill Ariana before, she wasn't necessarily hostile towards us until the kind of change in the state of the world. And so this is our first time getting the Erden Writhe rune for this run, so let's go ahead and read the full thing. So this is a carol rune that transcribes in human sounds. Writhe sees a subtle mucus in the warmth of blood and acknowledges visceral attacks as one of the darker hunter techniques. Visceral attacks restore quicksilver bullets. Human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade, and the essence of the Formless Great One, Erden. Both Erden and his inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. So there's like some small differences in the Japanese for that. We'll go ahead and pull that up. I mean, really, the text is very similar. Part of the reason why I want to read the Japanese is just because I think it just when you have both versions side by side, it kind of like crystallizes what it's trying to get at a bit more clearly than I think either one will do on its own. So if you will humor me, it says that it doesn't matter if it's human. Spilled blood is a high-quality catalyst, that is, the true nature of the formless superior being Erden. Therefore Erden and its unwitting adherents secretly seek it, and it being the blood. So this idea of Erden being like its purest essence coming from like oozing or spilled blood, I think does become relevant when we look at this version of Adella's questline and the way that she spilled Ariana's blood to in a way that she says she couldn't help herself. I think could be a very good reading that Erden may have had an influence on her. But other than that, like, it is really hard to say like whether or not the Great Ones do have motives for themselves, and if they do have like agendas in as far as like influencing the actions of the humans in this world. So with all of that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and go back to Central Yarnum to visit our old friend Gilbert and to re-encounter the imposter doctor Yosefka. So Scully says, interestingly enough, inadvertent simply means without deliberate planning, which could translate to a spontaneous decision to worship. Right. Ooh, maybe we'll get lucky with the doll, although I highly doubt it. Of course. Got our hopes up for nothing. And no more Gehrman. Okay. And so where Gehrman goes at this point in the game is anybody's guess. He just kind of pops in and out whenever it suits him. So do you remember old friend Gilbert? There he is right there, taking a midnight stroll. So there goes our friend Gilbert in what may have been the world's worst visceral attack. And from his corpse we do gain that claw mark rune. It is very, very heavily implied that this is none other than Gilbert, due to his home not being broken into, but very clearly being broken out of. And looking inside, he really doesn't have much in the way of furniture, or space, or doors, really. Thank you for the F's in the chat for our good old friend Gilbert. So this is another Carol rune that transcribes inhuman sounds. The claw mark is an impulse to seek the warmth of blood like a beast. It strengthens visceral attacks, one of the darker hunter techniques. Although the difference is subtle, Runesmith Carol describes the beast as a horrible and unwelcome instinct deep within the hearts of men, while claw mark is an alluring invitation to accept this very nature. I really do like the overall dialogue or description for the claw mark. It really does set a lot of the kind of environment for why so many people do seem to become lured into beasthood, especially since it's often described or depicted as being like a terrible, terrible transformation where we lose our sanity and then our humanity. Why would anybody want this? So I do like this idea that it seems like something incontrollable within the hearts of men that anybody can succumb to at any time. It is a lot more I don't know, engaging to me as far as some of the mechanics go of transformation in Bloodborne. Looking at the Japanese, I'm pretty sure it's mostly similar. I guess it poses the final paragraph as a bit more of a rhetorical question, as if beast discovered in man is the undesired terrible nature of man, then Clawmark, its revelation is a sign of inescapable temptation. And I think Aruki has... Oh, I guess he has not done that yet. I would have read his as well, just to get a slightly different take on it, just because it's always kind of fun to see where those similarities and differences may lie. So, I don't think we have a beast rune yet. Oh, well, we will get one from the suspicious beggar, which I do remember that we sent to the clinic as well. I forgot we did that. So this is a kind of a fruitful run in terms of looking at related concepts. I think the front door of the clinic will be closed at this point, since we left and didn't mess with the doctor. But we might get lucky and not need to go through the back. Okay, sweet. So that's a poor little Yosefka. Our note about seeking pale blood, aka the moon presence, to transcend the hunt. Poor Adella killed us, so our lantern was off. And then, stalking the halls down here, we will encounter the remains of the suspicious beggar. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, if we did kill the imposter doctor before coming down here, this man will still have transformed into a celestial emissary, which is a bit of a shame. I guess the only way we could really explain that would be, well, maybe he just drank some weird ass experimental liquids in the clinic and he would have transformed because of that, rather than anything the imposter did to him. But that's really just more making the best out of a bad situation as far as rationalizing NPC placement goes. What did you say? The emissary was Yosefka? Yes, the one that we first walked past in the clinic. The one that we're going to see in just a little bit is known as the Imposter Doctor, or as the fans like to call her, Fosefka. So she does take the place and try to convince the hunter to send NPCs toward her to advance her experiments. This is an example of like one of those NPCs we can send to her. This used to be the suspicious beggar that we found in the Forbidden Woods, and well, I'm very glad that you're learning this for the first time. Sorry to just kind of say it so nonchalantly, but we did talk about this a bit more in detail in the last stream, so I'm glad you stayed as well. So this is that suspicious beggar. When you do kill any of these celestial emissary patients in here, they will drop items that do correspond to their human forms. So if we sent Ariana here, she would drop her shoes. If we sent Adella here, she'd drop the weakest Erden Writhe rune. The narrow-minded man gives us like pungent blood cocktails, if I remember correctly. And the old lady gives sedatives. And the Gascoigne's little daughter also gives a formless Erden rune, the weakest variant of that, which is pretty interesting. So I think like the idea of Erden like only being stuck in Erden Chapel is a bit unsupported, because he will seem to infect anybody that he can wherever they are if they've taken the blood. So this celestial emissary obviously has like the silvery gray blood. It was kind of a bit in a trance, a little bit docile. Unfortunately stuck in the wall now. And he gives us the beast rune. Oh, I guess we did have a tier of it. So, a transcription of the roar of a labyrinth beast. The bearer of the beast rune has accentuated temporary transformation effects. Beast is one of the early Chaos runes, as one of the first to be deemed forbidden. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts. I did mention when we found the other version of this that the Japanese was most likely revised to say that the beast rune was the first Chaos rune discovered. The Korean version of this item does match up with the English, which, as I've mentioned before, just does not make sense linguistically. So it is very, very likely that the Japanese got updated and those updates weren't translated back into their respective languages. And just to show Skelly Baby what we showed off yesterday, we've got a figure of another Celestial Emissary patient in the back room, and the smoking gun to reveal that these were all once people at some point, despite us having like just killed that suspicious beggar. Is its left hand is very, very clearly still that of a human. It's got some pigmentation issues here on one of its legs to show like human skin, and it shows all of that off. So yeah, this is kind of one of the coolest aspects of the game's like kind of environmental lore storytelling going on. And when we do kill this celestial emissary that's just been hiding out over here, it does drop Yosefka's blood vial, which should reveal, of course, that this is the real Yosefka. As to whether or not like the imposter doctor is like a twin or a sister or just somebody else entirely, we don't really know. Unfortunately, they do share models, and we don't really even get information like some interviews to kind of expand upon their roles and how they really fit together. But for whatever reason, Miyazaki does say that he views this imposter doctor as a bit of a heroine in the story, and I can see what he means if like he interprets her goal of like causing people to transcend to like either great ones or kin as being altruistic and to lift humanity away from like a base and ignorant state. I don't exactly think that really pans out very well, but like I mentioned earlier, like do you really want to judge like a superior being with the morality of man? Like, can you even do so? Does it really even become relevant on a grander scale? Of course, like conducting experiments against people against their will is a very terrible thing, but if they are objectively raised beyond humanity, is it worth it? Those are like the kinds of questions that I think Bloodborne brings the player that don't really get brought up very often, but I think are very interesting and fun to talk about. Saturn says Yosefka at the beginning of the game has a different voice actress. She does. And they share models, but the imposter will also be wielding like the threaded cane, and you can kind of make that out through like the little gaps in the window. And we know that those gaps were put there intentionally because Lance McDonald told me like I think it was on one of his streams where he was like looking at the various stuff with like his 60 FPS mod of the game that they like altered the doors only like 1 month before or for release, so it was done very very late in development and must have been done very deliberately. So they were like opaque in earlier versions of the game. You mean the voice actress is different from the beginning as compared to when you're about to fight Falstefka? Yes. When you talk to Yosefka before fighting Father Gascoigne, that will be the real true Yosefka, and then when you fight her, or when you talk to her after you've killed Father Gascoigne, she'll have a different voice actress. She won't recognize the hunter as having talked to them before, and there's like a bunch of like very subtle indications that this doesn't seem to be the same person or like the person in the same capacity. So very very subtle, very very easy to miss. Partially just because it's really easy to miss talking to the real Yosefka for the first time in the game, and it's even more hard to make out that her voice changes after you defeat Gascoigne. You need to go back and check it all out for yourself. Yeah, it's definitely some cool details, and if you are curious, like I have shown this off on my VODs. I do have them uploaded to my YouTube, which should be included in the description or somewhere like my about page for the channel. So we came here earlier, and the imposter doctor remarked on our moonlit sense. She was up here, but now she's going to be in the back room in a very like a kind of a compromised position. So you've only talked to her before to get the vial from her? Yeah, so this run of the game I did manage to use her vial 5 times, and I was able to show off some of her kind of hidden special dialogue as well. So I do recommend checking out the VOD for that. It should be the second episode, like right at the very beginning, that you get to see that off. That special dialogue come into play. So this is the imposter doctor, and I think we do get some ambient insight either from talking to her, or maybe it was only when we first came into the area the first time, not this time. So as you can see, her positioning, like it seems to be prone, almost in like a kind of an older laboring type of position. It's not used so much nowadays. I don't really remember my source for that. Somebody told me about it. I kind of took them at their word, but I suppose I should have looked that up for myself. She seems to be twitching a little bit uncontrollably, as though she's having like seizures, but maybe the nature of what's going on with her will be revealed in with her dialogue.
God, I'm nauseous. Have you felt this? It's progressing. I can see things. I knew it. I'm different. I'm no beast. Oh, God, it feels awful. But it proves that I'm chosen. Don't you see how they writhe inside my head? It's rather rapturous.
So I really love this dialogue, and I think it really does like characterize part of like the kind of ascension or transcension process of Bloodborne, and whether or not this is something that's a bit more natural or something like artificially induced is a bit of a mystery. If we did kill the false Yosefka before coming into the clinic during the Blood Moon, she would drop the Erden Wraith rune, I think the second tier, and Ariana, of course, has the highest tier. So I think there is a kind of parallel between the two women. It does seem as though Erden is reacting with both of them to some degree. I think this would show that Ariana must have like a higher impurity count, because like the forbidden blood is what Erden is attracted to. That gets revealed in that umbilical cord description with Ariana's umbilical cord, but As far as Yosefka's goes, or like the Fosefka, it's a bit more of a mystery, like how that all comes out to be. Some people think that she got an umbilical cord from Byrgenwerth because her cord does talk about Byrgenwerth. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense because we were just at Byrgenwerth, and when could she have gone there and gotten it? Why wouldn't she have had this cord before the blood moon? I think it really raises more questions than it answers. Some people think she could have gotten like causes umbilical cord from Byrgenwerth. I'm just personally skeptical of all that. I think like the pose that they put her in is supposed to be suggestive for a reason. As Sundry reasserts, it is a birthing kind of position. So I think that is supposed to just like kind of connect the idea of umbilical cords being something that women can have spontaneously, like immaculately conceived within them, as being supported through like interactions with Erden, and this could be related to the idea of a child of blood. But let's go ahead and kill her and look at her umbilical cord and talk about that next. So we've done another terrible, terrible thing, but maybe she deserved it. We get another third of an umbilical cord, and as I mentioned on the previous stream, it really isn't 1/3 of an umbilical cord. It should be a third umbilical cord. Like there, while we might not have examples of like a first or a second cord, this instance is supposed to be an ordinal number. Ordinal number and not like a fraction. So this is supposed to be very clearly first, second, third chord. So going to the item description itself. This one, okay. So this one is hers. The other one's the abandoned workshops. So a great relic, also known as the cord of the eye. Every infant great one has this precursor to an umbilical cord. Provost Willem sought the cord in order to elevate his being and thoughts to those of a great one by aligning his brain with eyes, the only choice he knew if man were to ever match their greatness. So, as I had mentioned on the last stream where we looked at the umbilical cords, this idea that it is a precursor to an umbilical cord is a bit of a translation error. Let me look at it real quick. It's more like calling it an umbilical cord comes from the fact that they are only found in infant great ones. So how they came to use like precursor is a bit of a mystery. The Japanese word is like yurai suru, which just means like it originates from like whatever it's talking about beforehand. I think that first paragraph in general is a little bit hard to understand, even in Japanese. It took me kind of an embarrassingly long time to figure out what it meant, just because it's I don't know. It's just the writing on it is very weird. So just because it doesn't really define what the subjects of it are very clearly. So um, here's my like full description for it, starting from that first paragraph. So this is a great relic, also known by another name, eye cord. Only infants have them, even in great ones. Calling it an umbilical cord comes from that. Every superior being loses its infants and desires another. Therefore, this brought a chance encounter. Oh, sorry, that's the workshop one. So, every superior being loses its infants and desires another. Nope, that one's Ariana's. I'm screwing up so bad. Alright, so here's the right one. Headmaster Willem once sought this in order to attain eyes of thought. Wrap the inside of the brain with eyes in order to obtain the thoughts of a great superior being. Or possibly in order to rank amongst superior beings as a man. So the final paragraph is pretty similar, all things considered. And some people think that because it's talking about Willem, it must mean that this is related to Byrgenwerth. The way that I personally read this is it's probably more of a general description of the third chords altogether. And going back to the chat, Scully says, you think Yosefka's hands are big? I think that's partially just because of the way that the gloves fit on the hands. But Old Black Tiger does bring up a good question, which I was also going to bring up. If she was left alone, what would she have become? That is something I've certainly wondered, because you don't necessarily have to kill this Yosefka even to get the third ending of the game, and that does make me wonder if she's going to actually truly ascend to a state of having like a good great one, or the existence of a great one, if she was going to have a child of blood, maybe similar to Queen Yarnum, maybe something different than Ariana. I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know if she actually was chosen, but it's certainly a good question. I'm inclined to believe that she probably wasn't chosen like in a capacity better than Ariana, just because she does have a more vague or a less clear version of that Erden Writhe rune. And so Scully, you think that's feasible, and then Old Tiger says she would have been given birth to those slug things. I think that's certainly a possibility, or like those kind of infant experiments that we did show off within Byrgenwerth itself. And we will see a bunch more of those when we go into the lecture hall in just a moment. It does only say a womb, not some wombs. Sorry, Scully, what are you talking about? Like, it does only say a womb, like a womb will be blessed with child, because that line was also altered in the Japanese. So rather than saying like the wombs are blessed with child, um, it talks about like embracing children instead, and it uses the word idaku, which means like to literally hold or to embrace, rather than conceive. And I think that was changed in development because the Korean also goes with the idea of like conception, like the English does, and I think they scaled back the idea of like the child of blood to embracing things in the Japanese for whatever reason, and that ties into like that really ambiguous lore note that we looked at Byrgenwerth earlier this stream. So that is it for pretty much all of the NPCs. We can go ahead and see Eileen in the Grand Cathedral now as well, that I think about it. And yeah, let's go ahead and do that just because it is also kind of on the way to Yahar'gul, and that's where the entrance to the lecture hall is for us. And to be frank, Eileen might just like kind of stop me, just because I know the Bloody Crow is ridiculously difficult at this point in the game. I know Eileen's a little bit easier, but I honestly wouldn't expect her to be like a pushover. So if I die, it's not that big a deal. I'll just kind of leave her be for a little bit, and then come to her later on in the game when I get more levels. So Scully, you say you gotta go get some sleep. You've been a great pleasure. Watch the rest of the VOD. Okay, thank you for stopping by. I saw that you joined the Discord, so you will get those like live alerts as well. So I want to thank you for coming in and commenting and enjoying what I've been able to show you for the first time. I've appreciated that. So Black Tiger, you say she's twitching and acting as though she's feeling differently than Ariana. It was right before she gave birth, so maybe she wouldn't have given birth. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot to talk about it. So yeah, that idea of her twitching and her talking about writhing is really significant when we look at some of the brain fluid descriptions in the DLC. The Japanese is a lot clearer on one of them that it talks about like that writhing is the initial makings of eyes on the inside, and so the fact that she's experiencing writhing in her head and she's asking us if we can see inside her head, I think is supposed to be indicative that she is gaining eyes on the inside as well. And so whether or not that does tie into like the cord that she has, or if it's something that she herself is also gaining, is something that I've wondered in relation to her her like kind of state that she's in. So this is where Vicar Amelia was. We couldn't warp here because Eileen is kind of guarding this place, or like waiting in prey to like ambush us, and she'll have some pretty interesting dialogue when we come up to face her as well. So I'll go ahead and kind of stop talking for a moment to just try to highlight what she's got to say.
Few hunters can resist the intoxication of the hunt. Look at you. Just the same as all the rest. The hunters must die. The nightmare must end. Only I can stop this madness. The hunt makes hunters mad.
Alright, so I wasn't exactly trying to die there, but it's okay. I'll probably go ahead and face her once, maybe 2 more times, to just maybe show off like the second part of her dialogue. I think she has a little bit more to say if you like weaken her. Let me go ahead and try to look at her full-on text. So she has a lot of interesting things to say. She says like she wants to end the nightmare essentially by killing us, killing the hunter, which I think just does go to show off like how blood drunk she has become, because she was a hunter at one point. She should certainly know that you can't exactly like end the hunt just by killing the hunter, because we do have like a kind of a mastery over death for the night. And so I think the only like canonical way you could kill the hunter would be to like completely snub and snuff out their will to live and their will to fight on. And that might be relevant with like some of the moon presence's attacks, but like the only way to like kill the hunter is essential to literally make like the player quit playing the game, is the way that I like to read it. It's a little bit a meta in that kind of interpretation though. The hunter, frowny face. So is she the mad one here? Yes, I think so. I think she's gone blood drunk, and she might have been forced to take too many blood vials since we did not help her kill Henrik. I think that might be what's implied here, because if we do kill Henrik with her, I mean she'll be breathing heavily, but I guess like she's able to do it on her own, even though that doesn't really play out if you just only let her fight Henrik quite often. You'll just end up killing her and stopping the quest early. But as far as the canon story goes, that like that's kind of what I think they're going for. Like when you find her right before the Bloody Crow caned her, she'll say that she's taken enough to live, whereas like for whatever reason there is no Bloody Crow. So did she kill him beforehand? Is that what all this blood was supposed to be before? I mean, I doubt it, because this blood was here before we even fought Vicar Amelia. So I do wonder like what exactly or like where exactly the Bloody Crow is in this kind of instance. So for some reason she thinks only she can stop the madness, but hopefully we'll get a bit more of her dialogue when we go through this fight right here. She could get into the dream somehow and execute the hunter that way. Well, Jura does reveal to us that we only seem to dream for one night at a time, so I don't think Eileen can re-enter the dream, and I don't think it's here, but Eileen will say to go say hello to the little doll. I think that might only happen if you attack her and she kills you before Henrik. You don't know how she'd get into the dream, but yeah, I don't think she'll be able to get in there, but I suppose it's possible if we consider that like the nightmare of or the School of Mensis could access the nightmare of Mensis, but for whatever reason they don't exactly seem to have access to the hunter's dream, and it doesn't completely line up with the geography for the other kind of nightmares that we visit, but that doesn't mean they are disconnected at all.
The hunt makes hunters mad.
She got me while I tried to heal. Alright, so I'll give her one more attempt and then move on to the research hall if that doesn't pan out. So, for whatever reason, after the blood moon, like the crucifix wielding guys don't appear over here. Maybe because it would have like interrupted the flags for Eileen or like the Bloody Crow. I'm not sure. In the very like first version of the game, like the NPCs would just fall through the floor like all the time. Like so, you couldn't even really fight the Bloody Crow Canehurst. You just get a random blood dreg from him just falling off the map. Oh no.
The beasts cannot be stopped! What good are hunters now? Your blood is mine. A hunter's blood for me! Your punishment is death! Death to hunters! Enough of this terrible dream!
The hunt makes hunters mad.
Alright, so fortunately I did back off enough for her to like finish off her dialogue. So enough of this terrible dream is like the last of it. So I do like a lot of what that implies about Eileen. So I think that dialogue right there really just shows off that she must be blood drunk because she's pretty much demanding the hunter's blood for her. And she wants the dream to end, although just having the hunter's blood doesn't necessarily mean that the dream will end. So I think we'll just try to go ahead and kill her, even though I said that would be my last one. I think I really could have. I just was too passive trying to let her finish off that dialogue. Now that I've turned my HUD back on, that should be hopefully easier to manage. But trying to get some pretty decent footage for like potential lore essays later on, so forgive the not so technical difficulties. Oh damn, I do no damage. So yeah, like compared to the Bloody Crow, she doesn't hit as hard. Like the Bloody Crow would like one shot or just two shot with his gun. And so it just shows like she doesn't have nearly as much like blood tinge, which makes sense. I mean, the crow wields like the Chikage and is related to Kanehurst most likely.
The hunt makes hunters
I won't deal with you
mad.
now. So, Old Tiger says, you were discussing in the New Sunlight about the meaning of the blood being retrieved in Dark Souls. Someone said the idea of it was like a lot like the idea of retrieving blood echoes in Bloodborne. What do you think? As far as the mechanics of Dark Souls go, in terms of like the souls and things like that, I do think that overall the concepts are very similar. The execution, of course, is a bit different. Like, for all intents and purposes, like blood echoes can be equated to the idea of souls, I believe. I don't know if you know Japanese much at all, but like blood echoes are called like chi no ishi, and the ishi in this case is like dying wills, or the left behind like desires, hopes, and dreams of the people that it came from, and they're just kind of embodied through blood is what it's saying. And I think overall that idea is similar to souls, although there is like a bit of a divorcing from that, because like the souls in Dark Souls are more convoluted when you include like the idea of humanity and the dark soul, like literally. And so blood echoes are a bit similar to that, or like I think it might also be related to some concepts within like Taoism or like yin and yang. And forgive my pronunciation of this because I certainly don't know how it's pronounced, but if you're Chinese, you might be a little bit more familiar with the concept of like Hun and Po. I'm sure I probably said that wrong because it's a tonal-based language that I don't know. So I think that idea of Hun and Po could be related to the dichotomy between like blood echoes and insight.
Oh, Amygdala. Oh, Amygdala. Have mercy on the poor bastard.
And so we can hear the voice of that guy who gave us the tonsil stone talking to us. That is none other than Patches. And he just kind of cackles gleefully that we've been offered to his god. So we do wind up in a different location, the research hall, or not the research hall, the lecture hall. And this is another section of Byrgenwerth that was taken into the nightmare. And to kind of reinforce that it is affiliated with Byrgenwerth, we do get the same kind of images, like the infant experiments, which could be related to what's going on with the imposter Yosefka and Ariana and the celestial emissaries and the celestial larvae, as well as like all of the jars covered with wax and filled with eyeballs, and maybe like fetuses as well. So that's pretty much it, and I think this one is a better angle for like the kind of skulls that I mentioned before on the infant experiments as well. So we have been drafted into a nightmare location, which isn't very obvious at a first foray in here, but this is the one who sent us into the nightmare with the tonsil stone. This is Patches. He's a little bit hard to make out, but like along the walls right there, you can kind of see that it's got like spider legs, and so this man is got the body of a spider and the head of a man, which is pretty objectively like terrifying, all things considered.
What a joy it is to behold the divine.
It must be such a pleasure. You're in my debt, you know. You're nigh on a beast of the field. But here you are, treading a measure with the gods.
So I've said this before in the previous streams that I think they really made Patches' English dialogue a lot more flowery than it is in Japanese. He's a little bit hard to understand, in my opinion, for the English. So I'll just go ahead and read my accompanying retranslation of his text. So he laughs and then he says, "It's a blessing for man to be confronted by the arcane, and so you are a fortunate one. You should thank me, since it's not something peasants like yourself could naturally wish to gain." And then he laughs some more. And then he says, "What? Still dawdling about, are you? You're so passive. Bravely progress, and trust yourself to fate." And then he laughs some more, and that's for this line right here.
Are your feet as fat as your wits? Oh, cease this dithering. Take the plunge. Throw yourself to the wolves.
So I think that dialogue section right there is actually localized really well. I really like the line, "Are your feet as fat as your wits?" It's a pretty nice little insult telling you, like, keep on going. The only thing that I dislike right there is just him saying to, like, take the plunge. I think that the translators are trying to, like, make more of like a Patches reference where he just kind of always kicks the player into a pit. The idea of throwing yourself to the wolves is kind of nice imagery in terms of like keeping up with that kind of werewolf motif that they've got going on. But it is slightly different than like entrusting yourself to fate and like going on your journey and continuing on. So I think that part of his dialogue was just like a little bit obscured by the little bit of stylistic choices that they made for his dialogue. So and once again, this idea of the arcane coming into play is a bit more relevant. When he was talking about what a joy it is to behold the divine in this context comes from Shinpi, which is what they do call the arcane stat, and being able to come into contact with the arcane is something that most people can't do, is what he's saying, and that will become relevant when we do encounter the amygdala very shortly. Well, maybe not very shortly, but in terms of like the game, it'll be short. Maybe not so much for the stream. So coming into the lecture hall, we do see similar like experimentation tables, a lot of the kind of medical devices, more like a laboratory or like a school in like a chemistry lab, something like that. But all of this stuff we've already seen kind of floating around in Byrgenwerth. Maybe not so much like the desks. And I think they've got like these neat little like sinks, yeah, on them. I just like the kind of a little attention to detail like that. So coming into the next area, we will become accosted by some of the enemies here. These guys are called Slime Scholars. As you can see, it is a gelatinous man with a student uniform on. I did mention before, like, in the concept art, like, these things really did resemble Willem a lot more closely. These are a kin-type enemy, and they almost seem to be made out of mercury, and they do drop a lot of quicksilver bullets most frequently. When we get to the upper floor later on, like, some of these slime scholars will kind of be, like, puking or regurgitating into the vials, which they'll, like, throw that kind of liquidy or metallic like liquid at us, which could reinforce that like they might have been imbibing mercury instead of blood, and that might have caused them to change and come into here. But quite frankly, there's little to no information as to how the lecture hall ended up the way that it did, and the slime scholars ended up the way that they did. So we do get a new student uniform set as well as that lecture theater key. The description on the student uniform set is pretty much exactly the same, although there is just like one small difference. This version that we got in Byrgenwerth had the cape, whereas this one lacks the thick cape. And so the descriptions are exactly the same. There's just only like a line breaking difference on the final paragraph. And then we just did pick up that lecture theater key. And it says, this is the key to the lecture theater in the lecture building. Today, the two-story lecture building is adrift in the nightmare, but once it was a place of reflection where scholars learned of history and archaeology. Perhaps it still is, as the students in the lecture theater appear to wait the return of their professor. There is a small note about that I would make in that for whatever reason it isn't clear in the English, but the Japanese makes it abundantly clear that this lecture theater key was part of the school of Byrgenwerth. So it says, now this two-story lecture hall drifts in the nightmare, but was part of Byrgenwerth when it was a school of history and archaeology long ago. Perhaps the students might be waiting in the lecture hall for their master even now. So that's pretty much it for that description. It shows that for whatever reason Willem wasn't accompanied, or like did not accompany the students to the lecture hall, and we don't really get any more information as to how or why that transpired. So we can see some more of the slime scholars chilling on the ceilings over here. Why they'd be up there is anyone's guess. For being gelatin men, their arms can like extend quite a bit, and they don't really seem to be bound by the limits of flesh and bone. I do think that their faces also resemble those of like the church servants in like the cathedral ward, and their eyes are very similar. For whatever reason, they do kind of like tilt their head sideways, which does remind me of like Lauren Silver priests, or Silver Beasts rather. So whether or not like the church servants were related to the experiments on like the slime scholars is something I don't really have strong opinions about, or if a different experiment what caused like different types of transformations is another matter entirely. So it's really just left up to player interpretation, I suppose. So we get some more Madman's knowledges on the corpses here. Unfortunately, like they just kind of reuse a lot of assets in Bloodborne, so I don't necessarily think like it really matters if this corpse right here has more like a black church set on, and this one has more of like the hunter attire on. Or I guess that is kind of black church set as well. A little bit hard to make out. So you could read that as like maybe the church did have some way in here first, because when you do go into the other areas we will find more church affiliated hunters, but I just kind of take those with a grain of salt, quite honestly. And in the chest over here in the corner we do gain a red jelly, which kind of ties back into this idea of like the kinds of infant experiments that we can see right here in this cage, as well as like all over the place in the lecture hall. So it's a little bit hard to show off, but they kind of have like the fetal imagery going on. And then we get one of the more macabre items in the game. Oh, did I already pick one up? I honestly don't remember. So Old Tiger says, where can I access your essays? You're writing one of yourself advocating for the Age of Dark. Well, if you I do have a link to my spreadsheet in my channel description. Oh, it looks like it's kind of garbage on here now that I look at it. You can copy and paste that on the new Sunlight. I think my essays are located in the resources there. If not, just hit me up on there as well. They're also located on my Discord server. I've got them linked to my resources page there. There are a lot of tabs on my spreadsheets, and if you scroll all the way towards the right, you'll see the Fear the Lore tab. It's in blue, and you can find all of my written essays, and then all of the other tabs are just related to the various item translations and like enemy translation throughout the game. And I do have some Dark Souls stuff on there as well, if you're interested. So this is the red jelly. It's material used in a holy chalice ritual. stillborn infants born of a creature of unknown origin of the type found in some corners of the old labyrinth. And I don't think the Japanese really reveals much else for that either. But if you look at the imagery, it's certainly unsettling. So I guess the English says that they're stillborn infants, and I guess the Japanese does too. They're just in different locations. So it says they died in various places of the underground ruins. They are inhuman, stillborn infants. So I suppose like the creature of an unknown origin is a bit more evocative of perhaps beasthood, whereas this idea of inhuman children in the Japanese could be more evocative of like the Thumerians and maybe like Lorenites or the folks of Eyes as well, because they're just described as being inhuman in various places. So I think that's it. We can't access the... Oh yeah, we can. We just got the key. What am I talking about? So there is a little bit more to explore. Where is it? So using the lecture theater key, we gain classes or access to like a pretty large classroom, and we've got so many of the scholars. It really just kind of tanks the frame rate. Oh yeah, easiest way to deal with some of these is to really just kind of ignore them. Because with the whip, you can kind of just outrange everything. And I think a couple of the other weapons can also do it, but this is one of the better areas for farming early on in the game for like blood echoes. And watch me die after just talking all this crap. And so now my PS4's fan is definitely whirring. It's putting in some work. And so as I mentioned before, you really do gain like a ton of Quicksilver bullets from these kinds of enemies. And what class would be complete without a couple of sleeping students? But legally, after 15 minutes, they are allowed to leave class. So they're being pretty good students, considering that Willem has not shown up for quite some time. So, how did this place end up in the nightmare? We don't know, unfortunately. And why did that amygdala transport you to this place? The last stream I did talk about like receiving the tonsil stone from Patches. I think that is supposed to evoke the imagery of the amygdala, because in Latin the word for like tonsil is amygdala, and that also describes the shape of that organ of the brain, where it's tonsil shaped, and that's where it gets that name from. So in Japanese, the word for the amygdala great one enemy is amendozu, which is phonetically close to like an English way, or like the English pronunciation of almond, but in Japanese. Sorry, I just worded that very terribly, but like saying, if you said the English word almond in Japanese, it'd be closer to amendo, and so to make it plural, it'd be like amendozu. So I think that's where like the tonsil stone can be essentially also understood as being equivalent. And if you do look at the figure, the icon of it, it does resemble the head of an amygdala. And so it seems like this lattice type formation on the stone itself might have some connection to the nightmares or something along those lines, and that might also be why like the School of Mensis cages that they wear on their heads allowed them to gain access to the nightmare. We don't have like any explicit confirmations of that, but that just does seem to have a likely connection that like the lattice structuring of it functions as a kind of an antenna, it seems. So why did the amygdala transport you to this place? We don't really know. Without the tonsil stone, it would just inflict frenzy upon us and then drop us from the sky. We did that earlier in the other stream, and I fell to my death because I forgot that it would drop me because I wanted to make sure if it gave us insight or not. But for whatever reason, amygdala do seem to have a very strong connection to the nightmares and transporting people to and from them. That may have been how the School of Mensis initially gained access into the nightmares or gained awareness of the nightmares, because the town of Yarhagul just kind of places statues of Amygdala everywhere, and they really do seem to be venerated as kind of like all-knowing, supernatural cosmic beings. Patches does refer to Amygdala as a god, and he does seem to worship the Amygdala as well. And so if Patches was part of the School of Mensis, I do think all of that really does kind of align and supports each other. And so, aside from the tonsil stone, when you do have like the Eye of the Bloodjug Hunter, which does have a somewhat similar shape, although not really, this also allows us access into the Hunter's Nightmare from the Amygdala next to the Erden Chapel. So it seems like they can just transport things between the waking world and the nightmare, and potentially vice versa. So where did the tonsil stone come from? That came from Patches, the spider guy, and I'll show him off again in a second. So this is the back entrance to the lecture theater key room, and so this guy right here, once you kill a few of the bosses, I think once you progress to the night state after defeating Amelia, Patches can appear in pretty much almost any window NPC's location, and he'll talk to the player and give them the tonsil stone and tell us to come to the chapel to the right of the Grand Cathedral to come face to face with the Arcane for like to get more power for the hunt. But where did Patches get it? That's a very good question. Let's just go ahead and say like spooky spider magic, I suppose. Potentially like just as a student of the School of Mensis, they might have had some access to tonsil stones, and maybe that also helped them gain access to the nightmare. It's something I do wish we knew a bit more about. So coming into the lecture hall and getting through this little classroom here, we finally come into contact with the Augur Vibratus, which we did see Yurye using against us in Byrgenwerth. So this is another Phantasm-related hunter tool. So it says it's a remnant of the Eldritch Truth encountered at Byrgenwerth. Use phantasms, the invertebrates known to be augurs of the Great Ones, to partially summon abandoned Ebrietus. The initial encounter marked the start of an inquiry into the cosmos from within the old labyrinth and led to the establishment of the choir. So this item is really cool because it seems like this was the real beginning in Byrgenwerth's research into the cosmos, which eventually got later picked up by the choir. And so the Augur Vibratus does make it a lot clearer to me that the only abandoned Great One, or the left behind Great One, in the game text was Ebrietus, which relates to the Pearl Slugs as well. And so I don't know if the Augur Vibratus is exactly like the next step in the development of a Pearl Slug, but they certainly do look somewhat alike, although I'm not exactly like the most proficient at telling slugs apart, to be quite frank. So, as I've mentioned time and time again, this idea of the Eldritch Truth is a bit more only existent in the English version of the game. Like the Japanese doesn't talk about Eldritch things at all in terms of like H.P. Lovecraft. It always refers to Shinpi as like a reference to the arcane stat. And so For this case right here, it does not call the invertebrates familiars of great ones. It says augurs, just like the name of it implies. So there was a little bit of inconsistency within the English text as far as like even the phantasm descriptions go. I think that was about it for this. Let me just double check. Right. Oh, and yeah, it is pretty good that overall the description. One thing that does impress me that it says that it's remnant of the Eldritch Truth encountered at Byrgenwerth. Partially because when you look at it in Japanese, it almost might look like it would be like Mieta rather than Mamieta at a glance. So it seems like whoever did translate this did have some knowledge of maybe what the developers were going for, and that this isn't necessarily something that Byrgenwerth saw. It's something that they themselves encountered or confronted, and whatever like kind of cosmic force is in this phantasm, that did really seem to be what inspired Byrgenwerth to explore the underground tombs further and become more entrenched into research of the arcane. So, sorry for being a little bit wordy. Tiger says there are stones that look like the tonsil stones in the forest. Could they be the same kind of stone as the tonsil stone? That's a very good question. I don't know. Those stones definitely do resemble the tonsil stone as well as the amygdala. I think that's a pretty novel thought. I don't think I've seen too many people bring that up at all. So I don't necessarily have a problem. It would just be a little bit weird to lug around that gigantic kind of formation. But to be fair, like when you hold the celestial disc up to the clock tower, it doesn't really work out very logically itself. Same thing as just like holding up the Lord vessel in Dark Souls. Where was the chosen undead and holding that the entire time? So yeah, I do think that's a pretty cool thought, and I'll think about that a bit more. But I don't think it's completely discreditable for sure. So I do want to stream for about 3 hours each night. I'm fine with going a little bit over, or even a lot bit over, if the content is kind of demanding it, just for like ease of resolutions and things like that. So for everybody who stopped by tonight and chatted, I want to thank you. I do upload these onto my YouTubes later, so if you do miss out and want to catch up on more, you're more than welcome to view them there. And so they won't go away from Twitch. I do have the Discord channel linked to my descriptions, so if you want to talk lore, get some alerts of when I'm going to go live, you can do so there. We are going live at about 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every day, at least until this lore through is finished. So, once again, thank everybody for stopping by, dropping follows, and all that good stuff. Have a good night.